Tonight we are beginning with a mystery that puzzled the ancient Greeks for more than 1,000 years. Among all the great Olympian gods, there was only one goddess, whose temples welcomed mothers in childbirth, young girls on the edge of adulthood, frightened hunters before entering dark forests, and lonely travelers crossing dangerous mountain passes. Yet this same goddess also transformed a man into a stag, brought kings to their knees, and inspired so much reverence that one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was built in her honor. How could one immortal become both protector and executioner, compassionate guardian and relentless judge, gentle guide beneath moonlight, and a figure even heroes feared to offend? Some historians believe her worship may reach back even further than the Olympian gods themselves, preserving echoes of forgotten civilizations long before classical Greece emerged. Others argue that no deity reveals the ancient Greek understanding of freedom, nature, and sacred boundaries more completely than Artemis. So, before we continue tonight's journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy exploring these ancient stories together. And if you feel like sharing, tell us your location and local time in the comments. Somewhere in the world, someone else may be listening beneath the same moon. Her name is Artemis. Artemis, hunter, protector, maiden, archer of silver light. But those titles came later, long before marble temples carried her name, before kings prayed to her for victory, before frightened mothers begged for mercy during childbirth. There was only a child, and a request so unusual that even the king of gods paused to listen. You begin not on Olympus, but in silence, before her first hunt, before the bow, before the sacred deer. You find yourself imagining a child standing barefoot on cold stone, looking upward toward her father Zeus. Around him, thunder murmurs beyond golden halls. Immortal servants move quietly through columns of shining bronze. Clouds drift beneath the mountain as if Olympus itself floats above the world. She is young, yet not small. There is something unsettling about divine children. They do not carry innocence the way mortal children do. Even in youth, something ancient looks through their eyes. A strange certainty, a sense that destiny already breathes inside them. Artemis possessed that certainty. Ancient storytellers describe her not as timid, not as curious in the ordinary sense, but clear, focused, almost startlingly self-aware. She knew what she wanted, and what she wanted was not what anyone expected. Zeus, by many accounts, was amused when she approached him. He sat in power, surrounded by light storms and the quiet fear of every being in heaven. His children often came seeking gifts, power, status, weapons, recognition, privilege. Artemis asked for none of these. She asked for freedom, not temporary freedom, permanent freedom. She requested eternal maidenhood, no marriage, no husband, no surrender of autonomy, no household to manage, no role as wife, no obligation to desire what society demanded of women, mortal or divine. Imagine the silence after such words. Even now the request feels radical. In the ancient Greek world, identity was deeply tied to family roles. Women moved from the authority of fathers to the authority of husbands. Marriage shaped status, protection, and expectation. Fertility was celebrated. Motherhood was sacred. And here stood a divine daughter asking to refuse the structure entirely. Not out of bitterness, not from heartbreak. She simply knew herself. That may be what makes Artemis so enduring. She does not become independent because love failed her. She begins independent. That difference matters. Some traditions preserve the exact list of her requests. She asked Zeus for many names, so she would be honored widely among mortals. She asked for a silver bow and arrows crafted by the Cyclopes. She asked for 60 daughters of Oceanus as companions, 20 nymph attendants for her hunting dogs, mountains to roam, wilderness to call home. And she asked for light, not sunlight, moonlight, silver light, the kind that softens edges, the kind that reveals without exposing everything, the kind that belongs to silence. Zeus granted her requests. That moment shaped everything. But gifts always carry hidden prices. Freedom sounds beautiful from a distance. Up close, freedom often asks sacrifice. To belong fully to yourself means accepting what you may never have. Artemis gained independence. She also accepted separation. She would walk beside others but never fully with them. She would be worshipped by millions yet remain profoundly alone. Perhaps even then destiny understood the irony. The goddess who guarded young girls would never become a mother. The protector of childbirth would never give birth. The guardian of companionship would keep emotional distance. Already contradiction was becoming her nature, and contradiction lives at the center of Artemis. She's gentle to fawns, merciless to violators. She protects innocence yet punishes without hesitation. She brings life and death, comfort and fear, mercy and arrows. You begin to understand why the ancients struggled to define her. She was never meant to fit neatly into one role. Even as a child, omens gathered around her. Some temple traditions describe wolves howling on distant slopes during sacred rites. Others mention deer appearing near shrines unexpectedly. Surviving evidence suggests worshippers often associated sudden moonlit animal sightings with Artemis's attention. Was every deer a sign, every owl a warning? No one could say, but belief gave meaning to silence, and silence followed Artemis everywhere. Unlike her twin brother Apollo, who would become associated with music, poetry, prophecy, and radiant clarity, Artemis belonged to spaces without speech. Forests do not explain themselves. Mountains do not comfort you with answers. Moonlight does not reveal everything. It reveals enough, then leaves mystery intact. That was Artemis. You could approach her, but never fully possess understanding. Perhaps this is why she fascinated mortals so deeply. Most gods magnified human desires. Artemis challenged them. She asked an uncomfortable question. What if fulfillment does not come from being chosen by others? What if power comes from choosing yourself? For many women of the ancient world, Artemis represented something extraordinary. Not rebellion in a simple sense, something quieter, more sacred. She embodied untouchable autonomy, a woman who belonged to no man, a power that could not be negotiated, a will that did not bend. That made her inspiring. It also made her frightening, because independence unsettles systems built on expectation. The Greeks understood this tension well. Their myths often rewarded balance and punished excess. Yet Artemis stood as living contradiction, both revered and feared precisely because she rejected balance as others defined it. She would create her own order, and that order would be absolute. Still tonight, she remains only a child standing before her father, a child asking for the impossible, a child receiving everything she requested, or almost everything. Because destiny always withholds something, ancient myths rarely announce the missing piece at once. They let absence grow quietly. Some scholars believe the central tragedy of Artemis was not loneliness itself, but emotional distance chosen so early that later connection became nearly impossible. Another interpretation survives that her solitude was not tragic at all, but sacred completeness, which is true. Even now the question remains unresolved. Was Artemis lonely or free beyond ordinary understanding? The answer may depend on which myth you trust, or perhaps on what kind of longing lives inside you. Far below, Olympus forests waited, rivers waited, snow-covered ridges waited. Wild boars moved through brush. Deer stepped softly between olive shadows. Wolves watched from dark ridgelines. The wilderness already knew her, and somewhere beyond mortal sight, fate had begun weaving silver threads around a life unlike any other. Because soon Artemis would leave Olympus. Soon she would be born into pain. Soon prophecy would deepen. Soon a child would become protector. But destiny had not yet revealed its final intention. You leave Olympus behind and drift toward the open sea. Night wind moves across black water, carrying salt and mist against your face. Far ahead, beneath a sky scattered with stars, a small island rises from the Aegean like a dark, sleeping animal. This is Delos, though some ancient traditions insist it did not always have a fixed place. They believed the island once wandered across the sea, rootless and drifting, unable to anchor itself to earth. That detail matters because Artemis enters existence in a place that itself understands instability. Before she ever speaks, before she ever draws breath, the world around her already reflects uncertainty. Her mother, Leto, arrives exhausted. She carries more than pregnancy. She carries pursuit, humiliation, and fear. Zeus had loved her, and as so often happened in Greek myth, divine desire brought consequences not to the powerful man, but to the woman who received his attention. Zeus's wife, Hera, burned with rage. Her anger moved across Greece like a storm front. Temple traditions tell us Hera forbade any land under the sun from giving Leto shelter for childbirth. Mountains rejected her. Cities closed their gates. Shores denied her rest. Imagine the cruelty of that curse. Every contraction growing stronger, every refuge refusing mercy. You feel the desperation of that journey. Bare feet on hot sand, salt crust drying on skin, the ache of labour rising like waves, hours becoming days, days becoming unbearable. Some surviving traditions say even sacred springs withheld water. Whether literal or symbolic, the meaning remains clear. Leto endured isolation so severe that childbirth became exile. Then Delos accepted her. Why ancient storytellers disagree. Some believed the island pitied her suffering. Others said Zeus secretly promised Delos glory if it offered sanctuary. Another interpretation survives among modern scholars. Delos represented liminal sacred ground, neither fully stable nor fully claimed, making it beyond Hera's command. No one can know with certainty, yet the image remains powerful. When all the world said no, one small place said yes. Sacred olive branches bent in sea wind as labour began. Torchlight flickered. Waves struck stone. Nightbirds cried in the distance. Pain came. Then more pain. Then something strange happened. Ancient myth rarely describes birth softly, and Artemis's story is no exception. Many versions say Leto suffered 9 days and 9 nights. Hera had even delayed the goddess of childbirth, preventing labour's completion. Time stretched into agony. Every breath became work. Every moment tested endurance. And then Artemis was born. Moonlight touched her first. That detail appears again and again in artistic tradition. Silver before gold, quiet before radiance, cool light before the blazing sun associated with her twin brother. Even in birth symbolism, Artemis arrives as stillness before brilliance. But the mystery deepens here, because the moment Artemis enters the world, she does something impossible. She helps. Ancient hymns and later poets preserve one of the most remarkable details in all Greek mythology. Newborn Artemis assists in delivering her twin brother Apollo. Pause there, a newborn helping with childbirth. It sounds impossible because myth is speaking in symbols as much as narrative. Artemis is born and almost immediately becomes helper, protector, midwife. Before she knows language, she serves life. Before she hunts, she guides birth. Her destiny announces itself instantly. You kneel beside the sacred palm tree, where some traditions place the birth. Leto trembles with exhaustion. Sweat cools in night air. Her breathing breaks into ragged rhythms. Then Artemis, newly born, yet already divine, assists her mother. She is a child. She is not a child. This paradox follows Artemis forever. She embodies youth while possessing terrifying competence. She protects the young yet behaves with ancient authority. Even here, the contradiction begins. She is daughter and guardian at once. Apollo is born. The island changes. Music enters mythology. Light intensifies. Where Artemis feels like moonlit stone and moving shadows, Apollo feels like sunrise across marble. They are twins, but not mirrors. They are complementary opposites, silver and gold, silence and song, forest and temple, instinct and reason. And yet their bond will become one of the strongest in Olympus. That bond begins in pain. Relationships forged in suffering often carry unusual intensity. Artemis and Apollo share more than blood. They share origin under persecution. They begin life not in luxury, but in struggle beside an exhausted mother hunted by divine jealousy. That matters. Because family wounds shape gods as deeply as mortals, you can already sense what Artemis learns from Leto. Endure quietly, trust selectively, depend on yourself, protect Protection is sacred because vulnerability is dangerous. These lessons will not remain abstract. They will become instinct. Some researchers believe Artemis's later fierce protection of maidens reflects memory of her mother's helplessness. Another interpretation suggests her obsession with boundaries arose from witnessing what happens when powerful beings ignore consent and consequence. Again, myth leaves room for interpretation. But emotionally, the pattern is difficult to miss. Her first experience of the world is not celebration. It is threat, not safety, survival, not ease, responsibility. And perhaps that explains why Artemis matures differently from many Olympians. She rarely indulges excess. She does not chase luxury. She distrusts entitlement. She respects strength born from discipline. Because she watched suffering before she understood joy. Dawn eventually reaches Delos. Golden light spreads across wet stone. The storm has passed. Sea winds soften. Leto holds both children against her chest. Imagine that stillness. After agony, silence. After terror, warmth. Salt in the air. Olive leaves rustling overhead. Two divine infants breathing softly. Yet even in peace, omens remain. Ancient temple accounts describe sacred swans circling Delos 7 times after Apollo's birth. Other traditions speak of deer appearing at shorelines watching without fear. Priests later interpreted these as divine signs. Swans for Apollo's grace, deer for Artemis's wilderness. Signs matter because people need patterns, and Artemis would become a goddess of signs. A broken branch in moonlight, fresh hoofprints near a shrine, a sudden animal cry before dawn. Messages rarely came through words. They came through noticing, through attention, through instinct. That too begins here. As Artemis grows from infant to child, something becomes increasingly clear to gods and mortals alike. She is unusually self-possessed, not merely capable, centered. Even as a young divine being, she seems to resist influence. Praise does not inflate her. Fear does not shrink her. She listens, observes, decides. And somewhere in Olympus, even Zeus notices. This daughter will not be easy to control. Some fathers might resent that. Zeus strangely admires it, at least for now. But destiny always carries shadows behind blessings. For every gift granted at birth, myth usually hides a cost. Artemis gained strength early. Strength often demands emotional armor. She learned protection. Protection can become distance. She became guardian. Guardians often stand apart from those they guard. Already the seeds of future loneliness are growing. Still, those consequences remain far ahead. For now, Artemis is young. The sea continues breathing against Delos. Her mother recovers. Her brother sleeps. And the girl born beneath sacred pain opens her eyes to a world she will one day command. But beyond the island, mountain winds were already moving. Forests were waiting. And somewhere in the wild silence of untouched earth, creatures of claw, hoof and feather were preparing to meet their goddess. Time moves differently around gods. Seasons pass over mortal lands like waves. Yet on Olympus and in sacred groves, growth often feels less measured by years than by transformation. When you next walk beside Artemis, she is no longer the newborn of Delos. She has become a young goddess, swift in movement and sharp in attention. Morning mist curls around mountain slopes. Cold dew wets the grass beneath your feet. The scent of pine, wet stone and wild thyme fills the air. Somewhere ahead, something moves through brush so softly that only Artemis notices. She raises one hand. You stop. Silence returns. Then a deer emerges. Its coat glows amber in slanting sunlight. Steam rises faintly from its breath in the cool air. The animal studies Artemis without panic. This is your first true glimpse of something unusual about her. Wild creatures do not simply tolerate her. They recognize her. Wolves lower their aggression. Hounds obey without command. Deer pause rather than flee. Even birds alter their calls when she passes. Ancient worshippers believed animals sense divine presence more honestly than humans. If that belief held truth anywhere, it was here. Artemis steps forward. Bare feet over roots and moss. No wasted movement. No hesitation. She kneels before the deer and rests a hand against its neck. The animal does not resist. In that quiet contact, you begin to understand the world Artemis has chosen. Olympus offers gold feasts, music, argument, ego. The wilderness offers something else entirely: precision, instinct, reality stripped of ornament. In forests, status means nothing. Hunger matters, weather matters, speed matters, attention matters. Artemis prefers that honesty. It shapes her. Unlike many Olympians, she does not crave admiration as nourishment. She does not need constant praise. She finds clarity where speech disappears. Some scholars suggest this reflects older pre-Olympian nature cults absorbed into Greek religion, where wilderness deities represented sacred forces beyond civilization's control. Whether historically precise or not, the symbolism fits. Artemis belongs to the uncultivated edge of existence, not chaos. Wild order. There is a difference. The forest is not random. It has rules. Predator and prey understand them. Survival depends on respecting them. Artemis learns those rules intimately, and she expects others to respect boundaries with equal seriousness. This becomes central to her identity. Boundaries, territory, consent, distance. Ancient myths return to these themes again and again. Cross a line she has drawn, and consequences follow. But that severity is still forming, for now she is becoming. She gathers companions. As requested from Zeus, young nymphs join her retinue. Some come from rivers, others from forests, springs, mountains, and sacred groves. They are maidens, like her, sworn to freedom and discipline. Together they run through valleys under moonlight, bathe in hidden springs, and sleep beneath cedar canopies, while embers glow low in campfires. At first, this resembles joy, and it is. Laughter exists here, more than many assume. Artemis is often remembered only for severity, yet early traditions preserve warmth among her companions. She races them through fields, hunts beside them, shares silence that feels companionable rather than cold. Her chosen family begins here. That matters because Artemis does love, just selectively. She does not reject affection. She rejects possession. This distinction is crucial. Her relationships flourish when autonomy remains intact. The moment control enters, harmony fractures. You see this even with Apollo. Though their domains diverge, the twins remain deeply bonded. When they meet, their contrast feels almost cosmic. Apollo arrives radiant, carrying music and prophetic confidence. Artemis arrives cool and observant, carrying bowstrings and moonlight. He speaks easily. She speaks sparingly, yet she listens to him, and he respects her. That mutual respect becomes rare among Olympian siblings. Their closeness also reveals something else. Artemis is not emotionless. She simply protects emotion carefully. Protection becomes easier when distance exists. But distance has costs. You begin noticing them. At night, after the others sleep, Artemis often remains awake. Moonlight paints silver across her face. Fire embers pulse softly. Wind moves through olive branches overhead. Her companions dream nearby, safe in shared warmth. She watches the darkness, always watching. Why? Ancient poets rarely answer directly. Some suggest divine vigilance, others interpret it symbolically. Guardians seldom sleep deeply because responsibility sharpens awareness. If you exist to protect, rest becomes complicated. Perhaps Artemis already feels that burden, or perhaps something deeper stirs. Loneliness, not because she lacks company, because she lacks equals. This is a different solitude. You can stand among many and still remain unreachable. Artemis increasingly embodies that condition. Her companions adore her. They cannot fully understand her. Apollo loves her. He does not live as she lives. Leto cherishes her. A mother cannot accompany every transformation. Even Zeus, generous with gifts, remains distant in essential ways. So Artemis turns more fully toward wilderness, toward mountains, toward moonlight, toward spaces where solitude feels natural instead of painful. There is symbolism here ancient worshippers would have understood deeply. The moon is never entirely absent. Even when unseen, it remains. Artemis becomes similar, present in hidden ways, felt rather than always seen. Priests in certain regions believe moon phases reflected aspects of feminine transition, childhood maturity, aging, renewal. Artemis became especially associated with thresholds of growth, not motherhood itself, but the passage toward womanhood. Not civilization itself, but the movement between wild and structured life. She guards transitions. Why transitions? Because transitions are vulnerable, child to adult, safety to danger, known to unknown. These are moments when protection matters most. Perhaps because her own beginning involved vulnerability, Artemis becomes guardian of vulnerable thresholds. Then comes the hounds. She asks for hunting dogs, and divine companions answer. Large, swift, intelligent animals join her hunts. Ancient poets sometimes name them individually, describing their speed, endurance, and ferocity. These are not decorative animals. They are disciplined instruments of pursuit. And Artemis trains them, firmly, patiently, without softness that becomes weakness. Again, you notice a pattern. Her compassion never excludes discipline. She can be nurturing. She can also demand excellence. Failure in wilderness carries consequences. A delayed arrow, a missed sign, a broken formation. These can mean death. So Artemis sharpens everything around her. Companions grow stronger. Hounds become precise. Her own instincts become almost supernatural. Then comes a dream, or perhaps a vision. Ancient traditions disagree. One night under a moon so bright shadows appear blue against stone. Artemis dreams of a stag unlike any earthly creature. Its antlers shine like branches of silver fire. Its eyes hold stars. It stands on a distant ridge and watches her without fear. Then it turns away, walking deeper into mist. Invitation or warning? She cannot know. But omens matter, especially to gods. Artemis wakes before dawn. Cold air touches her skin. The dream lingers. Some priests later claim this vision predicted her future dominion over sacred deer and untamed wilderness. Others believed it represented a warning power over nature does not equal ownership of nature. That interpretation feels especially fitting. Artemis never seeks ownership, only stewardship. Control without domination. Strength without corruption. At least that is her ideal. Reality will test it, because ideals remain pure only until challenged. Soon, mortals will encounter her more directly. Soon, admiration will mix with fear. Soon, someone will cross a boundary they do not fully understand. And when that happens, the child of mountains and moonlight will reveal something far sharper than grace. For now, though, dawn returns gently. Mist lifts from valleys. Deer vanish into trees. Artemis rises from camp bough, resting lightly in her hand. She looks toward distant ridgelines as if hearing something no one else can hear. Perhaps fate, perhaps warning, perhaps simply wind. But beyond those mountains, another thread of destiny had already begun to move. Morning sunlight spills across Olympus, warm and golden. But Artemis does not linger in its comfort. Even now, as divine halls gleam with polished marble and drifting incense, you can feel her impatience. The palace breathes with ritual servants moving quietly, goblets catching light distant lyres, filling the air with soft music. For many gods, this is paradise. For Artemis, it feels like confinement dressed in beauty. Too many walls, too many expectations, too many eyes. She has grown stronger. Not merely in skill, but in certainty. The uncertainty of childhood has narrowed into conviction. She knows what she will allow. She knows what she will refuse. And soon, she will speak that truth so clearly that even gods will understand there can be no negotiation. You walk with her toward a high terrace overlooking the mortal world. Clouds drift below like white rivers. Eagles circle in the distance. Zeus stands waiting. Thunder murmurs faintly beyond the horizon, as if the sky itself listens. There is no fear in Artemis. Respect, yes. Submission, no. That distinction matters. Many children of Zeus seek favor through flattery or obedience. Artemis never learned that language. She speaks plainly, almost with unsettling calm. Ancient storytellers repeatedly preserve this quality in her character. She does not plead. She states. And today she states a vow, eternal maidenhood, absolute autonomy, unbroken independence. She will belong to no husband, no lover, no household, no political alliance. Her body, her time, her devotion and her purpose will remain her own forever, not for a season, not until some future exception. Forever. The word lands heavily. Even among immortals, forever has weight. A mortal vow lasts a lifetime. A divine vow can outlive civilizations. You can almost feel Olympus pause. Some gods would laugh. Some would object. Some would assume youth speaking too boldly. Yet Artemis does not sound uncertain. She sounds final. This is not rebellion born from anger. It is identity spoken aloud. That difference gives her vow unusual force. She is not running from love because she has been wounded. She is choosing a life aligned with her deepest nature. Ancient Greek listeners would have recognized the radical nature of this choice immediately. Marriage in their world was not merely romantic union. It structured inheritance, household stability, social expectation, and civic order. To reject marriage entirely was to reject one of civilization's most defining institutions. Artemis chooses wilderness over structure, movement over settlement, self-possession over belonging, freedom over intimacy. But every sacred vow creates sacred boundaries, and boundaries require enforcement. This is where Artemis changes. Until now, her independence has been personal. After this vow, it becomes law. Not law written on tablets, law written into divine consequence. Whoever violates her sacred autonomy or the autonomy of those under her protection will face judgment. That principle becomes central to her worship. Her maidens must remain devoted. Her sacred spaces must remain respected. Her body must remain beyond intrusion. Her rituals must remain pure. At first, these rules may sound severe, but ask yourself what happens when boundaries remain symbolic without consequence. They become requests. Artemis refuses to let sacred boundaries become negotiable. Zeus understands this, and to the surprise of many, he agrees. Some traditions portray him amused, even proud. Others suggest he saw political advantage in granting her independence. A daughter who desired neither throne nor marriage threatened no divine balance. Another interpretation survives among modern scholars. Zeus recognized something unbreakable in Artemis and understood refusal would only strengthen resistance. Perhaps all contain truth. Whatever his reasoning, he accepts. The vow becomes sacred, irreversible, and with acceptance comes transformation. Artemis is no longer merely a divine daughter of promise. She becomes an archetype, a force, a symbol mortals will carry for centuries. Women begin seeing in Artemis something startlingly rare. Not domestic virtue, not seduction, not maternal devotion. Autonomous womanhood, power without attachment, protection without submission. For some, she becomes liberating. For others, deeply unsettling, because independence often inspires admiration and resentment simultaneously. You begin seeing consequences immediately. Her companions change around her. The nymphs who run beside her now take vows of their own. They dedicate themselves to shared discipline. Sacred sisterhood forms not through hierarchy alone, but through mutual commitment to freedom. They hunt together, sleep beneath stars together, guard one another. In ritual spaces dedicated to Artemis, maidens across Greece later reenact this symbolism. Some temple traditions suggest girls nearing adulthood participated in ceremonies honoring Artemis before marriage, symbolically inhabiting a final period of untamed youth. Historians continue debating exact meanings, but the emotional truth feels clear. Artemis protects the threshold before transition, the moment before society claims you. That is sacred to her, and perhaps because it is sacred, she becomes increasingly intolerant of violation. Tolerance narrows, mercy becomes conditional. This is the hidden cost of absolute ideals. Purity creates clarity. Purity can also create rigidity. Artemis's strength and danger both grow from the same root. Uncompromising conviction. Conviction inspires. Conviction punishes. Soon, myth will show both. But even now, subtle loneliness deepens. You notice it in quiet moments. Her companions laugh beside streams. Apollo visits with music and stories. Leto speaks with maternal warmth. Yet Artemis remains slightly apart, even in closeness. Not cold, just unreachable. A strange paradox emerges. She creates community. She cannot fully enter ordinary intimacy because her vow protects more than body. It protects distance, and distance becomes habit. Some scholars argue this is the tragedy hidden beneath Artemis's glory. Others disagree completely, seeing no tragedy at all. They argue modern readers often mistake solitude for suffering because we assume intimacy must equal fulfillment. Artemis challenges that assumption. She asks a difficult question. Can wholeness exist without romantic attachment? The ancients never fully agreed. Neither do we. That unresolved tension helps explain her enduring power. She remains interpretable. She reflects longing differently for each era. Then comes the omen. Late one evening, after sacred fires burn low and mountain winds grow colder, Artemis stands alone at the edge of a pine forest. Moonlight spills across stone. The air tastes sharp with frost. Silence stretches so completely that even insects seem absent. Then wolves howl. Not one, many. Their voices rise from distant ridges in layered harmony. Long, haunting, primal. Artemis does not flinch. She listens. Ancient priests often interpreted wolf cries as warnings tied to transition danger or divine attention. Some believed wolves served as guardians of sacred thresholds. Others associated them with hunting power and instinct. Tonight, the meaning feels unmistakable. Something is coming. A crossing. A test. The wilderness itself seems to acknowledge her vow. Not with celebration, with recognition. You feel it too. The child of Delos is gone. The girl of moonlit forests is gone. In her place stands the huntress. Silver bow soon in hand. Sacred law now established. Unbreakable boundaries drawn. And boundaries only reveal their true meaning when someone dares cross them. That moment approaches. Far below Olympus, in mortal forests, a hunter will one day wander where he should not. A glance will become catastrophe. A single violated boundary will echo through myth forever. But Artemis does not know that yet. She turns from the dark ridge and walks deeper into the trees, moonlight following her through shifting branches. Behind her, sacred fire dims. Ahead, the forest waits, and somewhere in that waiting silence, destiny prepares its first true test. The path downward begins where sunlight cannot follow. Artemis leaves the open air of mountain ridges and descends toward a place older than temples, older than kings, perhaps older than memory itself. The earth cools around you with every step. Damp stone presses close. Mineral water drips from unseen cracks. The scent of iron ash and sulfur thickens in the darkness until each breath tastes metallic. Somewhere far below, something massive strikes metal against metal, slow, rhythmic, unmistakable. A forge, not a mortal forge with village fire and hammered bronze. Something far greater. You are entering the workshops of the Cyclopes. Ancient myths describe them as giant smiths of immense strength and terrifying focus, one-eyed makers of impossible weapons. These were not merely craftsmen. They were builders of divine force, thunderbolts for Zeus, tridents for Poseidon, helmets of invisibility for Hades. Their work shaped power itself. And now Artemis has come for her own. The cavern opens. Heat slams into you like a wall. Molten metal glows white gold in channels, carved through volcanic stone. Sparks rise in violent bursts, floating upward like fiery insects before disappearing into blackness. Massive hammers rise and fall. Each impact sends shock through the floor beneath your feet. Even the air trembles. Artemis does not. She walks forward with the same still focus she carries through forests. No awe, no fear, only purpose. That tells you something important about her transformation. She's no longer merely defining boundaries. She's preparing to defend them. Ideals alone cannot survive in a world of force. Sacred law requires enforcement. Artemis understands this instinctively. She needs a weapon worthy of her vow, not ornamental, not ceremonial, precise, swift, silent until release. The bow suits her perfectly. Ancient symbolism makes this almost inevitable. Unlike swords, bows create distance between hunter and target. Distance matters to Artemis. Distance protects boundaries. Distance preserves control. The archer decides when closeness is unnecessary. The arrow travels where the body does not. That is Artemis. She does not need to approach to wield power. The Cyclops begin their work. Silver ore melts. Flame roars. Hammer strikes multiply. Ancient poets describe divine weapon making with reverence because forging symbolizes transformation through pressure. Raw metal becomes strength only through fire and force. In a way, Artemis undergoes the same process. Her childhood ideals are now tempered into disciplined power. Fire shapes metal. Responsibility shapes gods. The bow emerges slowly. Its curve is elegant yet severe, not decorated with excessive jewels or royal symbols. No vanity, no wasted detail, only balanced tension function. It gleams with pale silver light, almost lunar in tone. When lifted, it seems to catch every flicker of flame and transform it into cold radiance. Then come the arrows. Long, perfectly weighted, their tips shimmer with unnatural sharpness. Some traditions say her arrows carried sudden death. Others believed they carried swift release from suffering. Ancient Greeks sometimes associated Artemis's arrows with sudden illness, especially among women and children, while Apollo's arrows often represented plague among men. This dual symbolism reveals something unsettling. The same weapon could protect life or end it. Mercy and death. Again, contradiction. Artemis accepts the bow, and the moment her fingers touch it, something changes. You feel it immediately. The weapon does not simply belong to her. It completes her. There are rare moments in myth when object and identity fuse so completely that one becomes symbolic of the other. Zeus and thunder, Poseidon and trident, Athena and spear, Artemis and bow. From this point onward, imagining Artemis without the bow feels almost impossible. She tests the string, a single pull. The sound is quiet, yet the entire cavern seems to listen. Not loud, sharp, pure tension, like a promise or warning. She steps toward an opening where underground wind rises from deep volcanic cracks. A distant column of smoke twists upward. Far beyond, a tiny bird circles near the light. Artemis draws. Her posture becomes impossibly steady, shoulders relaxed, breath silent, eyes fixed. No hesitation. Release. The arrow vanishes. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the bird changes direction mid-flight, startled by a silver streak that passes so close it parts feathers without drawing blood. Perfect control. Not kill. Choice. That matters. Power means little without precision. And precision means little without discipline. Artemis possesses both. This is what separates her from so many divine figures. Many gods wield enormous force. Few embody such focused restraint. She does not waste movement. She does not indulge spectacle. Even violence, when she chooses it, feels efficient. That efficiency earns respect. It also creates fear, because unpredictable power terrifies. But controlled power can terrify even more. At least unpredictability offers hope. Perfect accuracy does not. Word spreads. Gods notice. Nymphs whisper. Mortals begin hearing stories. The huntress of moonlight, Natwa, now carries a divine bow forged in fire beneath the earth. Sacred groves begin receiving offerings. Hunters leave small carvings of deer. Maidens braid ribbons on branches. Mothers burn oil lamps beneath her image. Reputation grows before myth's great incidents arrive. This matters because fame changes perception. Once people fear disappointing Artemis, they begin watching themselves differently. Ritual purity becomes more important. Sacred spaces become more carefully guarded. Her presence becomes psychological as much as spiritual. People behave differently because Artemis might be watching. Whether she truly watches every moment hardly matters. Belief alters behavior. That is power. Yet fame brings another consequence. Expectation. The more Artemis becomes symbol, the less space she has to be uncertain. This is the hidden burden of reverence. Mortals worship ideals. Gods trapped inside ideals may lose flexibility. Artemis increasingly becomes expected to embody perfection. Perfect discipline, perfect purity, perfect judgment. But perfection creates pressure. What happens when emotion complicates principle? What happens when compassion and law conflict? What happens when love challenges vows? Those questions remain distant, for now confidence rises. She hunts more frequently. You run beside her through cedar forests and rocky slopes. Hounds surge ahead. Wind tears through your hair. Hooves thunder across uneven earth. Then you see what others begin to understand. Artemis does not hunt merely to kill. She hunts to read. Tracks in mud, broken grass, disturbed leaves, heat in air, movement in silence. Every hunt is interpretation. This becomes symbolic of her entire nature. She reads what others miss. A pause before speech. A hidden intention. A violated boundary. A lie. Few things anger Artemis more than intrusion disguised as innocence. Because hunters understand concealment, predators often hide intent. So she learns to distrust appearances. That trait will soon matter, very much. Then comes another omen. One evening, after a successful hunt, Artemis washes her hands in a spring so clear, the stars reflect before full night arrives. Water runs cold over her skin. The forest is silent except for distant cicadas. Suddenly the spring ripples. No wind, no falling branch, just ripples. Concentric circles expanding across still water. Ancient Greece treated disturbed water as meaningful. Springs connected mortal and divine realms. Sudden movement could signal presence, warning, or prophecy. Artemis watches. The ripples spread, then stop. Stillness returns, but something unsettles her. Not fear, recognition. A threshold approaches. Somewhere, someone will test the boundaries she has spent her life defining. A hunter, a gaze, a mistake, or perhaps not a mistake at all. Myth cannot fully agree. Only this remains certain. The silver bow is no longer ceremonial. Soon it will judge, and when judgment comes, all Greece will learn a harsh truth. The goddess of moonlight can be merciful, but she can also be merciless. The first time you witness Artemis judge a mortal, there is no thunder, no dramatic storm, no divine proclamation from the sky. That is what makes the moment so unsettling. Judgment arrives quietly, almost gently. Morning light slips through cedar branches in pale golden ribbons. The air is cool enough that breath still lingers faintly. Birds call from the upper canopy. Somewhere nearby, water runs over stone in a narrow stream. Everything feels calm, ordinary, alive. And yet something has changed. Artemis no longer moves through the wilderness merely as hunter. She moves as law. That distinction transforms everything. A hunter reads tracks, predicts movement, and survives through skill. A judge does something more dangerous. A judge decides consequence. Skill may earn admiration. Judgment demands authority. Once Artemis begins deciding who deserves mercy and who deserves punishment, her role in myth deepens dramatically. She becomes feared not only for power, but for standards. And standards can terrify, especially when they are absolute. You begin seeing this in small moments, before larger myths reveal it fully. A young hunter enters sacred woodland without ritual offering. He is talented, proud, eager to prove himself. His footsteps are careless. He breaks low branches unnecessarily. His hounds bark too loudly. He laughs where silence should be respected. Nothing catastrophic happens. No lightning strike. No divine arrow. Instead, his hunt fails. Every trail vanishes. Every animal disappears. His dogs lose scent. By sunset, he leaves exhausted, hungry, confused. Temple traditions from various regions preserved stories like these. Not always dramatic punishments, sometimes simply withdrawal of favor. This matters because Artemis's judgment is not always violent. Often, it is precise correction. Loss of success, loss of clarity, loss of harmony, a warning, respect the boundary, return differently. This reveals an important truth about Artemis. She does not seek punishment for its own sake. She seeks alignment, harmony with sacred order. To understand her justice, you must understand the wilderness she protects. Nature is not sentimental. A distracted hunter starves. A careless climber falls. A thirsty traveller who ignores weather dies. The wild teaches consequence without negotiation. Artemis absorbs that logic. She becomes its divine expression. Ancient Greeks often feared gods because divine morality rarely operated through modern notions of fairness. Yet Artemis's justice feels unusually consistent. Cross a sacred boundary knowingly or carelessly, and consequence follows. Respect boundaries and protection often comes. Simple, severe, clear. But clarity creates its own danger. The world is rarely simple. Intent matters. Accident matters. Ignorance matters. Emotion complicates law. Artemis increasingly struggles with these grey spaces. You notice it during the hunt. A boar bursts from brush, massive and furious tusks wet with foam. Hounds scatter. One young nymph freezes. Fear locks her body. The animal charges directly toward her. Artemis moves instantly. No hesitation. Bow rises. String pulls. Release. The arrow strikes cleanly. The boar collapses only feet away. Silence crashes over the forest. The nymph trembles. Artemis lowers her bow and approaches. You expect comfort, warmth, reassurance. Instead, her voice is calm and sharp. Why did you freeze? The question cuts deeper than accusation. The nymph struggles to answer. Fear, shock, instinct, all understandable. Artemis listens, but her expression remains unreadable. Then she speaks again. Fear is natural. Surrender is chosen. The words linger. Harsh. Perhaps. Wise. Also perhaps. That tension defines her leadership. She protects fiercely. She also demands growth. To remain under Artemis's protection is not passive. She expects vigilance, discipline, and self-mastery. Her companions are not sheltered through softness. They are strengthened through expectation. Some flourish under this. Others quietly struggle. This becomes another subtle cost of Artemis's ideals. Perfection inspires. Perfection also exhausts. Not everyone can live inside constant discipline. Yet Artemis rarely lowers standards, because lowered standards in the wilderness can kill. Again, strength and severity share roots. Then comes worship. By now, shrines to Artemis have multiplied across Greece. In forest clearings, harbour towns, mountain passes, and sacred groves, mortals leave offerings. Olive oil, honey cakes, carved animals, braided ribbons, silver charms shaped like crescents. The smell of burnt incense rises from altars as priests and priestesses speak her name in prayer. But listen carefully to those prayers. They reveal how mortals perceive her. They do not only ask for successful hunts. They ask for protection of daughters, safe passage through wilderness, safety during transition from childhood to adulthood, protection from predators, animal and human. This is where Artemis's reputation evolves beyond hunting. She becomes guardian of vulnerability, especially feminine vulnerability, and that role carries emotional weight, because Artemis understands threat intimately, not from personal violation, from observation. She has watched how power behaves. She knows what gods can do, what men can do, what entitlement can justify. That knowledge hardens her resolve. She will not permit intrusion where she can prevent it, not in sacred groves, not among her maidens, not within her own body, not without consequence. This growing severity begins changing how even Olympians speak of her. Some admire her discipline, some mock her rigidity, some avoid provoking her altogether. Even Zeus watches with interest. There is something fascinating about Artemis to the other gods. She refuses many games that dominate Olympus. She rarely schemes politically, rarely manipulates through seduction, rarely bargains through flattery. She acts directly. That directness feels refreshing and dangerous because direct power leaves little room for interpretation. Then comes the dream. It arrives during deep night. Sacred fires burn low. Wind moves softly through pine branches. Artemis sleeps beneath open sky-silver bow resting beside her. In the dream, she stands in a forest she does not recognize. No birds, no insects, no wind, absolute silence. Ahead lies a pool of water smooth as polished obsidian. She approaches and sees her reflection, but the reflection is wrong. Someone else stands beside her, a man, young, strong, carrying a hunter's spear. His face remains blurred as if mist refuses to reveal him. He reaches toward the water. The surface breaks. Blood spreads outward in crimson circles. Artemis wakes instantly, breathing steady, eyes open, hand already on bow. Nothing moves around camp. Only darkness, only moonlight, only silence. Yet the dream clings. Ancient interpreters treated prophetic dreams seriously, especially when tied to sacred figures. Blood in water often symbolized violated purity, broken boundaries, or irreversible consequence. Artemis understands none of the details, but she understands warning. Someone is coming, a hunter, a gaze, a crossing. You feel destiny tightening, and so does she. From this point onward, Artemis becomes more alert, more guarded. She chooses more secluded bathing springs, more hidden forest routes, more carefully protected sacred spaces. Her companions notice the shift. Tension grows, not panic, preparation, like a hunter sensing movement just beyond sight. This is what separates Artemis from everyone around her. Not merely skill, not beauty, not divine birth. Clarity. She sees lines others ignore. She knows when something sacred is being approached carelessly, and once she sees it, she does not look away. That is both her greatness and her danger, because judges who never ignore violations can become merciless. Soon, a mortal hunter will step into forbidden space. Some traditions insist by accident, others believe desire guided him. Historians and storytellers still debate, but the result will echo through myth forever. And when that moment comes, all of Greece will learn that Artemis's silence should never be mistaken for softness. The hunter has become judge, and judgment is coming. The day begins beautifully, which somehow makes what follows feel even more unsettling. Sunlight filters through oak branches in warm sheets of gold. Cicadas sing in steady rhythm. The forest smells of wet moss, crushed laurel, and mineral-rich spring water. A narrow path winds through rock and fern until it reaches a hidden basin enclosed by smooth stone walls and draped ivy. Water falls from a cliff in silver strands, gathering below, into a clear pool untouched by mud or leaf. This is sacred ground, not marked by walls, not guarded by gates, protected instead by secrecy, ritual, and understanding. This is one of Artemis's bathing springs. You arrive with her and her companions in rare peace. Boughs are set aside. Hounds rest beneath shade. Laughter moves softly through the air as the nymphs loosen their hair and step into the cold water. For a brief moment, severity fades. Artemis looks younger here, less like judge, more like sister. Water runs over her skin in silver light. Moon goddess though she is, sunlight still catches around her like polished marble. The pool becomes a place of trust, perhaps one of the few spaces where vigilance relaxes. That matters, because violation wounds most deeply where safety is assumed. Far away, another story unfolds. A hunter moves through the forest. His name is Actaeon. Ancient sources disagree about him. Some describe him as noble and skilled, trained by the great centaur Chiron. Others portray him as proud, increasingly boastful, too certain of his own excellence. That uncertainty matters because the central question of his myth has never fully settled. Was he guilty or merely unlucky? Even now, scholars continue debating. In one version, Actaeon accidentally stumbles upon the sacred spring while hunting. He parts branches seeking game or water and sees what no mortal should see. In another version, accident feels less convincing. Curiosity guides him. Desire keeps him from turning away. Some later retellings even suggest arrogance drove him, believing no sacred boundary applied to him. Myth leaves room for judgment, perhaps intentionally, because the story asks something uncomfortable. At what point does seeing become violation? Actaeon enters the clearing. He stops. The world stops with him. Before him stands Artemis, uncovered, unshielded. For one suspended heartbeat, no one moves. Water falls, sunlight glitters, breath catches. Then everything changes. The nymphs scream first, bodies turn, hands reach for cloth and concealment. Panic erupts in the pool. Artemis turns and sees him. This is the moment that survives across centuries. Not the punishment, the gaze, his eyes meeting hers. Because Artemis's mythology is deeply concerned with sight. To see without permission can become an act of power. Observation is not neutral when boundaries are sacred. Modern readers often reduce this myth to punishment for looking, but ancient symbolism suggests something more profound. The issue is not nakedness alone. It is intrusion, violation of protected space, a sacred boundary broken by unauthorized presence. And Artemis feels it instantly. Shock comes first, not rage. That matters. For the briefest instant, something raw crosses her face. Vulnerability. Rare, almost unbearable, because Artemis has built her identity around control, autonomy, and inviolate boundaries. In one accidental or intentional moment, that control fractures. Someone saw her unguarded. Someone entered what was not theirs. That wound strikes deeper than embarrassment. It strikes identity. The forest seems to hold its breath. Actaeon should run, or kneel, or beg. Traditions differ on what he does. Some say he freezes in horror, fully aware of catastrophe. Others suggest fascination traps him for one fatal second too long. 1 second is enough. Artemis reaches for water. Not arrow, not bow, water. That symbolic detail appears in several retellings and carries weight. Water. The element of exposure cleansing vulnerability becomes the instrument of transformation. She scoops the spring in her hand and casts it toward him. Her voice is cold, precise. Ancient poets preserve variations of her words, but the meaning remains. Now tell others what you saw if you can. The curse begins instantly. Actaeon stumbles backward. Pain twists through him. His breath breaks. Hands convulse. Bones crack. The sound is terrible, not loud. Wet, violent, irreversible. You watch transformation unfold with mythic brutality. Fingers fuse. Arms lengthen and distort. Skin ripples beneath impossible movement. Spine bends. Skull reshapes. Terror floods his eyes as antlers burst upward from his head. He becomes a stag, not fully in mind. That is the cruelty. His human consciousness remains. He understands everything. He cannot speak. This matters deeply. Ancient Greek punishments often targeted identity through transformation. The body changes, but awareness remains trapped inside altered form. Actaeon experiences horror not only through pain, but through helpless recognition. He runs. Instinct and terror drive him into the forest. Branches whip past. Hooves strike earth. Breath burns. Then he hears them. Dogs. His own hounds. This is where the myth becomes almost unbearable. They smell prey, not master. They pursue. Some ancient poets listed the dogs by name, perhaps to heighten emotional cruelty. These were animals Actaeon trained, fed, loved. They know his scent more intimately than any human. Yet the curse overrides recognition. Or perhaps transformation truly changed everything. Again, interpretations differ. The chase begins. Through ravines, across streams, over stone. The hounds close in. Actaeon tries to call them. No words emerge. Only stag cries. He understands. No rescue is coming. No explanation matters. The pack reaches him. Then comes the end. Violent, swift. His own dogs tear him apart, while his hunting companions search in confusion, calling his name into empty woods. Actaeon dies unheard. The forest falls silent. Even now the myth disturbs, because it refuses easy moral comfort. Was the punishment just? Ancient Greeks themselves debated this. Some defended Artemis completely. Sacred boundaries once violated demand absolute consequence. Others felt discomfort. If Actaeon truly stumbled in by accident, was death excessive? That discomfort matters. Artemis's mythology is not designed to make her easily lovable. It is designed to make boundaries unforgettable. This event changes her reputation forever. Before Actaeon, Artemis was revered. After Actaeon, she is feared. Mortals understand something new. Her boundaries are not symbolic. They are lethal. Sacred groves become more carefully respected. Ritual purification grows stricter. Hunters whisper warnings to apprentices. Parents tell daughters and sons alike the story of the man destroyed by a single forbidden gaze. The lesson spreads. Respect what is not yours. Turn away when sacred space demands it. Do not assume innocence erases consequence. Yet, beneath mythic lore, another layer lingers. How did Artemis feel afterward? Ancient texts say little, but silence itself becomes revealing. She does not celebrate. No triumph follows. No boasting. No satisfaction. Only withdrawal. She returns to wilderness, more guarded, more distant. Because punishment restored the boundary, it did not erase violation. That distinction matters. Consequences can protect law. They cannot undo what happened. Something subtle hardens inside her after Actaeon. Mercy narrows. Trust becomes rarer. Vigilance deepens. The dream from before has come true. A hunter, a gaze, blood in water, prophecy fulfilled. But prophecy rarely ends where it appears to end. One fulfilled warning often opens the door to another. Far beyond her forest, destiny is already preparing something far more dangerous than violation. Not intrusion. Attachment. Not a hunter who sees too much. A hunter who might understand her. And that possibility will prove far more frightening. After Actaeon, the forests feel different. The trees have not changed. Pine needles still soften the earth beneath your feet. Streams still sing over smooth stone. Moonlight still spills across ridgelines in silver silence. And yet, something invisible has shifted. Reverence has become caution. Devotion has become distance. When mortals speak Artemis's name, now admiration carries a tremor beneath it. Fear, not panic. Respect sharpened into anxiety. This is the beginning of Artemis's greatest paradox. The more perfect she appears, the more difficult she becomes to approach. Perfection inspires worship from below, but it rarely creates intimacy. It creates altitude, distance, silence, and Artemis increasingly lives at that altitude. Her reputation spreads across Greece with unusual force. In harbour towns, sailors leave small offerings before long journeys through dangerous coastal waters. In mountain villages, hunters whisper prayers before entering snow-covered forests. In shrines beside olive groves, young girls braid ribbons and hang them from sacred branches. Mothers teach daughters her name with both reverence and warning. Be strong, be watchful, protect what is yours, but also do not offend her. This dual perception shapes Artemis's worship in profound ways. Ancient religious practice was rarely built only on affection. Fear mattered, awe mattered. The Greeks used ritual not simply to praise gods, but to remain in right relationship with divine power. Artemis becomes one of the clearest examples of that balance. Love her, respect her, never assume leniency. You begin noticing how this affects Artemis herself. The more people worship her as ideal, the less room she has to appear uncertain. Expectations harden around her like marble. The huntress must remain disciplined. The maiden must remain pure. The protector must remain vigilant. The judge must remain unwavering. A symbol is forming. Symbols do not easily bend. That is the hidden price of perfection. At first, the change appears subtle. Artemis speaks less during gatherings. She leaves Olympus sooner. She spends longer periods away from temples and divine halls, preferring deep wilderness where titles and expectations fade into wind and birdsong. Her companions still run beside her, yet even they sense new distance, not rejection, reserve, like a door that now closes more quickly. One evening, you watch her camp with the nymphs beside a cold mountain lake. Fire crackles softly. Smoke rises straight into still air. Stars reflect in black water so clearly the lake resembles another sky. Her companions laugh over small stories from the day's hunt. One imitates a stubborn hound. Another mocks Apollo's habit of speaking too confidently during archery debates. Laughter spreads. Even Artemis smiles. Briefly, then it fades. She turns toward the lake, watching, thinking. This is the loneliness perfection creates. Not absence of company, absence of equal vulnerability. Who comforts the protector? Who reassures the one everyone trusts? Who guards the guardian? These questions rarely receive answers in myth, because divine figures often function symbolically, but emotionally the silence matters. Artemis carries immense responsibility, while allowing few close enough to witness burden. And burden accumulates. This becomes clearer in her relationship with Apollo. Their bond remains strong, yet even here, change emerges. Apollo's world expands toward prophecy, music, healing, and civilization. He thrives in temples filled with song and worshippers. Praise energizes him. Recognition sharpens him. Artemis moves opposite. Praise isolates her. The more mortals exalt her, the more she retreats into wilderness. Their contrast deepens. Still, Apollo sees what others miss. One night, he finds her alone on a ridge where moonlight paints the rocks silver blue. Wind moves through tall grass in slow waves. Far below, scattered village fires glow like embers. He says little at first. That is unusual for Apollo. He understands silence matters here. At last, he asks a simple question. Are you content? Not happy, not proud. Content. The question lands deeply because it avoids performance. Artemis does not answer immediately. Ancient myths rarely preserve such intimate conversations directly, yet imagining this exchange reveals emotional truth within their relationship. Apollo knows her better than most. If anyone notices strain beneath perfection, it is him. She finally speaks. What answer would satisfy you? A deflection, gentle but deliberate. Apollo studies her. That was not an answer. Silence again. Then Artemis says something revealing. They need certainty. 3 words, but they contain everything. Mortals need certainty. Companions need certainty. Worshippers need certainty. Her maidens need certainty. A protector who hesitates weakens trust. A judge who doubts weakens law. Apollo understands immediately. Perfection has become duty, not vanity, responsibility. She fears uncertainty not because weakness disgusts her, but because others depend on her strength. This reveals something essential. Artemis's severity does not come only from pride. It comes from responsibility. If she lowers vigilance, someone vulnerable may suffer. That belief hardens her discipline. It also traps her, because no being mortal or divine sustains perfect certainty forever. Eventually, emotion complicates law. Eventually, affection complicates boundaries. Eventually, life presents contradictions that cannot be solved through discipline alone. Artemis has not faced that test yet, but it approaches. Then comes the omen, the clearest one yet. It happens during a hunt before dawn. Frost clings to grass. Breath clouds in cold air. Hounds move silently. The sky is still dark except for a fading crescent moon. Artemis pauses near a clearing where mist hangs low over the ground. At the center stands a stag, magnificent, larger than any natural creature. Its antlers spread like branches of living silver. You recognize it instantly. The dream stag, the one from her vision. It watches Artemis without fear, without movement, without sound. Even the hounds remain strangely still. The moment feels outside ordinary time. Artemis slowly lowers her bow. She does not aim. She understands this is no prey. The stag turns, begins walking into mist. Not running, inviting, calling. She follows, through fog, over stone, past cedar trunks fading into white silence. Then the stag stops. It turns one final time. Its eyes reflect starlight. And then it vanishes. No hoofprints, no broken brush, nothing, only mist. Only silence. Ancient priests would later interpret sacred deer as signs of transition, especially in myths tied to Artemis. Some believe such visions marked turning points in divine fate. Others argued they symbolized untouched innocence or elusive truth. Whatever the meaning, Artemis understands one thing. Change is near. Not threat alone. Transformation. A new kind of challenge approaches. Not a violation to punish. Not a boundary to defend. Something far more dangerous. Connection. Because the next figure entering her life will not come as trespasser. He will come as equal in skill. A hunter, a companion of wilderness, someone who understands silence, someone who can keep pace. And that possibility unsettles Artemis more than any enemy ever could. Because enemies strengthen boundaries, understanding threatens them. For the first time, fate prepares a test no arrow can solve. Far beyond the ridges, beneath another stretch of stars, a giant hunter already walks the earth. His name is Orion, and destiny has begun moving him toward her. Before Orion enters Artemis's life, fate pulls her backward into an older wound, one rooted not in the wilderness, but in family. Night settles over a great city of stone walls and torchlit courtyards. Warm air carries the scent of olive oil smoke and wine. Musicians play in distant halls. Servants move between columns with lowered eyes. At the center of this world stands a queen whose confidence has slowly ripened into arrogance. Her name is Niobe. She is wealthy, beautiful, powerful, but above all she is proud. Pride alone does not doom people in Greek myth. Public pride often does, especially when it challenges sacred order. Niobe has many children, sons strong in youth, daughters radiant in beauty. In some traditions there are 14, in others 12. Numbers change across retellings, but the symbolism remains constant: abundance, fertility, success visible enough to invite comparison, and comparison becomes the seed of disaster. One day, during ritual offerings to Artemis's mother, Leto Niobe speaks words that echo far beyond the temple. Why honor Leto? She asks it openly. Why worship a goddess who bore only 2 children? Why kneel before her when Niobe herself has borne so many more? The insult cuts deeper than simple boasting. This is not merely maternal pride. It is public humiliation. A mortal queen placing herself above a goddess, above Leto, above sacred reverence, and perhaps most painfully, above the suffering Leto endured to bring Artemis and Apollo into the world. That is the hidden cruelty. So Niobe sees numbers. She does not see pain. She counts children. She ignores sacrifice. You feel why this matters to Artemis. Her bond with Leto was forged in exile, labor, persecution, and survival. Few emotional anchors in Artemis's life run deeper than loyalty to her mother. Leto represents endurance without spectacle, quiet strength, dignity under suffering. To insult Leto is not merely to insult family. It is to dismiss suffering itself. Word reaches Olympus, or perhaps Artemis hears it first through prayer wind or sacred whisper. Myths differ, but however the message arrives, something cold settles inside her. Not explosive rage, something more frightening. Stillness. Apollo hears too. The twins meet, no long debate follows. That silence between them says everything. There are moments when siblings need no explanation, only shared understanding. Ancient poets often frame Artemis and Apollo as complementary executioners of divine justice. Apollo brings radiant precision. Artemis brings cold inevitability. Together they form balance, sun and moon, brilliance and shadow, male and female force aligned. Now that force turns toward Thebes. You travel with them, not physically through roads, but through mythic inevitability. Divine judgment rarely feels rushed. It feels certain. Torchlight flickers in Niobe's palace. Her children laugh. Musicians continue playing. Servants pour wine. Life proceeds in ordinary confidence. That is often how tragedy arrives. Not with warning everyone recognizes. With warning ignored, yet omens did come. Some traditions speak of birds scattering from temple roofs. Others describe ritual flames sputtering strangely, priests uneasy, dogs howling at dusk. Ancient listeners would immediately understand such signs. Sacred order had been disturbed. Consequence was approaching. Niobe does not listen. Pride rarely listens. Morning comes, then judgment. Apollo strikes first. His arrows descend with terrifying precision upon Niobe's sons. Youth collapses into silence. Strength becomes fragility in moments. Panic erupts through palace courtyards. Shouting replaces music. Sandals scrape stone. Mothers scream. Guards run helplessly. Then Artemis moves toward the daughters. This is where modern readers often recoil, and rightly so. The myth is brutal. Greek myth frequently uses extreme punishment to dramatize the danger of hubris, but emotionally, the event remains difficult. Why punish children? Ancient traditions answer differently. Some suggest the children embodied Niobe's pride extensions of her boast. Others see the deaths, symbolically representing collapse of worldly abundance before divine reality. Some scholars argue the severity reflects ritual warning literature rather than moral realism. Yet none of those interpretations fully remove discomfort. Perhaps they are not meant to. Artemis draws. Silver light catches the arrow. Release. Again. 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 Each shot flawless. Each consequence final. The queen who measured worth through offspring watches abundance vanish. That is the cruel symmetry of divine judgment. The boast determines the punishment. Niobe compared motherhood through numbers. Numbers become emptiness. Soon, the palace falls silent except for grief. Then comes the image that survives across centuries. Niobe standing among death, not screaming now, not boasting, frozen, uncomprehending, grief too immense for immediate expression. You watch Artemis. This matters. How does she feel? Victorious, satisfied. Ancient texts remain restrained, but careful reading suggests something more complicated. Artemis is not wild with fury. She acts with absolute control. No wasted anger, no emotional collapse. But control is not the same as peace, because justice has been served and suffering remains. This is one of the first great cracks in Artemis's moral certainty. Before boundaries seemed clear, violation, consequence, simple. Here consequence reaches beyond offender. Collateral grief emerges. Children suffer for maternal pride, and even within divine logic complexity enters. Justice can be deserved. Justice can still wound more than intended. This matters because Artemis is evolving. Perfection becomes harder to maintain once moral ambiguity appears. Some ancient artists depicted Niobe afterward transformed into stone upon Mount Sipylus, eternally weeping. Even as rock water continued flowing from her form like endless tears. Historians note this myth may connect to an actual weathered rock formation, resembling a mourning figure later absorbed into legend. Symbolically, it is powerful. Pride becomes stone. Grief becomes eternal. Tears never stop, and Artemis sees it. She sees what divine judgment leaves behind. Memory, loss, silence. Consequences do not end with punishment. They echo. That realization settles quietly inside her. Not enough to change her outwardly, but enough to deepen complexity. Apollo notices. As they leave, sunlight begins spreading across distant hills. The air smells of dust and cold marble. Neither twin speaks for a long time. At last, Apollo breaks silence. Would you choose differently? A difficult question. Artemis answers without looking at him. No. A pause. Then softer. But I understand more. That may be the most human thing she has said so far. Understanding without reversal. Wisdom, born not from abandoning principle, but from recognizing cost. This marks an important transition. Artemis remains powerful, remains disciplined, remains uncompromising. Yet something subtle changes. She now knows justice can carry sorrow, even when justified. And sorrow leaves openings. Openings for empathy, openings for hesitation, openings for emotion she cannot easily categorize. Fate notices such openings, because destiny often introduces transformative relationships only after certainty softens. The girl of iron boundaries is becoming more complicated, which means she is becoming more vulnerable, not to enemies, to feeling, far beyond palace walls under a sky thick with stars. A hunter walks alone across open land. He carries immense strength, unmatched skill, and a strange comfort with solitude. Soon Artemis will meet him, and for the first time in her immortal life, someone may stand beside her without fear. That possibility will change everything. Night stretches wide above the earth, clear and impossibly deep. Stars burn with unusual sharpness, scattered across the sky like silver fire pinned to black velvet. Wind moves through dry grass in slow waves. The air smells of cedar dust and distant sea salt. Somewhere beyond the hills, Wolves call once and fade into silence. Artemis stands on a ridge bough, resting lightly at her side, studying the horizon with the calm vigilance that has become second nature. Then she senses it. Movement, not careless, not prey, controlled, deliberate. Someone is approaching. She turns. A figure emerges from shadow, tall, broad-shouldered, steady. He carries a hunter's weapon with effortless familiarity. Every step reveals strength without waste. No swagger, no performance, only competence. Moonlight catches his face as he stops at a respectful distance. This matters immediately. Distance. He stops before crossing it. Already he has done what so many fail to do. He recognizes boundaries. His name is Orion. Ancient myths disagree wildly about Orion's origins. Some traditions describe him as a giant born from divine intervention. Others call him a prince, a legendary hunter, or even a child of the sea god Poseidon. Some myths grant him the ability to walk across the sea itself. Historians and classicists still debate which traditions came first, but every version agrees on one truth. He is extraordinary, not because he is merely strong, because he belongs to wilderness. Like Artemis, that is rare. Most mortals entering Artemis's orbit desire something from her blessing: victory, protection, recognition. Orion arrives carrying none of those visible hungers. He studies the land the way she does. He notices tracks, wind direction, animal silence, shifting scents. He reads the wild, and Artemis notices that instantly. Neither speaks at first. Silence stretches. For many, silence creates discomfort. Not here. That may be the first true point of connection. He does not rush to feel quiet. He allows it. At last, Orion speaks. I saw your hounds tracking uphill. Simple. Practical. No flattery. No dramatic reverence. Artemis studies him. You followed them. I followed the stag. Interesting. Not pursuit of goddess. Pursuit of hunt. Again, boundaries remain intact. This matters more than Orion understands. Their first exchange feels almost ordinary. That is precisely what unsettles Artemis. Ordinary interaction is rare for her. Most mortals either tremble or boast. Orion does neither. He simply stands, present, competent, unafraid. Not disrespectful, just unafraid. And for perhaps the first time in years, Artemis feels something unfamiliar. Curiosity, not suspicion. Curiosity. That alone is dangerous. The hunt that follows deepens everything. At dawn, they track together through pine valleys and rocky ledges. Frost still clings to shaded stone. Breath clouds in cool air. Hounds move ahead in disciplined formation. Orion reads broken brush. Artemis reads disturbed earth. He spots claw marks on bark. She notices bent grass under dew. Their skills interlock, not identical, complementary. This is new. Artemis has hunted beside companions. She has never hunted beside an equal. That distinction changes emotional gravity. When one person continually excels beyond everyone around them, solitude becomes structural, respect exists, challenge disappears. Orion disrupts that pattern. He keeps pace. Sometimes he anticipates her conclusions. Sometimes he sees what even she misses. That should irritate her. Instead, it sharpens her focus. She becomes more alive in his presence, more attentive, more engaged. Apollo would notice the change instantly. So do you. The hunt ends near sunset. They rest beside a cliff overlooking the sea. Below, waves strike rock in slow thunder. The sky burns orange, then crimson, then deep violet as daylight fades. Salt wind cools sweat on skin. Orion breaks the silence. You prefer night. Not a question. Observation. Artemis glances toward the rising moon. Yes. Why? Few ask her that directly. Fewer still deserve an answer. She considers. Night reveals what daylight hides. Orion thinks about this, then replies. Night also hides what daylight reveals. A small thing. A sentence. Yet something shifts. He answers insight with insight, not challenge for dominance. Conversation, exchange, mutual seeing. This is the deeper danger, not attraction, recognition. To be recognized is more threatening to guarded souls than desire. Desire can be rejected. Recognition penetrates defenses. Artemis begins noticing Orion beyond skill. He respects animals. He does not kill carelessly. He values patience over dominance. He does not mistake power for entitlement. These qualities matter profoundly to her because they contradict patterns she distrusts. He takes without violating, acts without intruding, approaches without claiming. Such restraint feels almost unbelievable, and still tension grows. Her companions notice. The nymphs whisper after hunts, longer conversations, more shared silence, more time spent away from camp. Nothing improper by ordinary standards. Yet for Artemis, even emotional proximity carries weight, because vows are rarely broken all at once. They are tested in increments. A conversation, a shared glance, a thought you do not immediately dismiss, a silence that feels warm instead of empty. That is how boundaries soften. Artemis senses this, and she does not like it. Not because Orion has done wrong, because he has done nothing wrong. Violation is easier. Punishment is clear. Respect complicates defense. What do you do when the one approaching honors every boundary? That question begins haunting her. Then comes the omen. One night, Artemis dreams again. She stands beneath a star-filled sky. Orion stands beside her looking upward. Above them, constellations slowly rearrange. Stars move like living things. The great hunter shape begins forming across the heavens. Then a scorpion crawls from darkness. Massive, silent. Its shadow stretches across the stars. Orion turns. Too late. The sky fractures. Artemis wakes. Cold, still, alert. Her hand grips the bow. Moonlight spills across camp. Everything is quiet. But the dream lingers with brutal clarity. Ancient interpreters often saw scorpions as symbols of hidden threat, betrayal, inevitable fate, or death emerging from overlooked ground. Artemis understands only one thing. The dream is warning. Orion is tied to danger. Perhaps he threatens her. Perhaps something threatens him. Perhaps both. Prophecy rarely explains itself, and this uncertainty unsettles her more than clear danger ever could. The next day, Orion notices the change. She speaks less, withdraws slightly, becomes guarded again. He does not push. That restraint somehow makes everything harder, because pressure strengthens walls. Patience invites openings. Soon Artemis will face a truth more frightening than any curse. She may care, not abstractly, personally, and if that is true, then for the first time in her immortal life, she has something real to lose. Above them, stars continue turning. Destiny is already writing the hunter's name across the heavens. But neither of them yet understands the price that constellation will demand. After Orion enters Artemis's life, silence changes. It no longer feels empty. It becomes shared. This is perhaps the most dangerous transformation of all, because Artemis has built much of her identity around solitude that felt complete. Solitude gave clarity. Solitude preserved control. Solitude protected sacred boundaries. But companionship, true companionship, changes the emotional geometry of a life. It creates new centers of gravity. Orion becomes one, not suddenly, not through confession or spectacle, through repetition. Shared hunts, shared paths, shared stillness beneath moonlight. The intimacy grows precisely because neither names it. That makes it more powerful. Artemis begins noticing subtle shifts inside herself. She listens for his footsteps before she sees him. She anticipates his observations. She feels the difference when he is absent. These changes are small enough to deny, yet impossible to fully ignore. This is new territory. And Artemis does not like uncertainty, not because uncertainty is weakness, because uncertainty threatens identity. If she allows attachment, what becomes of the vow that shaped her life? What becomes of the sacred law she embodies? The question sharpens. Ancient traditions diverge here more than almost anywhere in Artemis's mythology. Some insist romantic love blossomed between Artemis and Orion. Others reject romance entirely, arguing theirs was profound friendship companionship between equals without physical desire. Modern scholars continue debating which interpretation better reflects early Greek belief. Perhaps the ambiguity itself matters most. Artemis's deepest connection remains difficult to categorize. Even myth resists simple labels. That feels appropriate. One evening, they stand near the sea. Wind drives salt spray against black rock. Waves strike the shore with rhythmic force. Above them, stars appear one by one as twilight deepens into night. Orion looks outward across dark water. "Have you ever wanted something different?" he asks. Artemis studies him. "Different from what? From what you chose?" The question lands like an arrow. Not aggressive. Honest. Orion has done what few dare. He has spoken toward the center of her identity. Her vow. Her solitude. Her chosen freedom. Artemis answers slowly. "No." A pause. Then softer. "Sometimes I wonder what choice means after enough years." Orion turns toward her. This is perhaps the most vulnerable thing she has ever said to him. Choice repeated long enough can begin feeling indistinguishable from fate. Did she continue choosing solitude? Or had solitude simply become her only imaginable path? Orion understands the weight of the question. He does not offer easy answers. Instead, he says, even paths chosen freely can become cages. Silence follows. Not peaceful silence, dangerous silence. Because truth has entered, Artemis feels something she cannot easily master. Fear, not fear of battle, not fear of death, fear of transformation. Because if Orion is right, then the life she built may contain walls she no longer fully sees. That possibility unsettles her profoundly, and she is not the only one watching. Olympus watches. Gods notice shifts in each other more quickly than mortals realize. Artemis spends more time away, more time with Orion, more time in emotional terrain unfamiliar to her. Some gods ignore it, some gossip, some disapprove. Ancient myths often place Apollo at the center of what follows. His role changes by version. In some traditions, Apollo becomes protective, fearing Artemis may abandon her sacred identity. In others, jealousy drives him, not romantic jealousy, but fear of losing the unique bond he shares with his twin. Another interpretation survives. Apollo simply recognizes what Artemis refuses to admit. She loves Orion. Whatever his motive, concern grows. Then fate tightens. The day arrives, bright and deceptively calm. Sunlight dances across open sea. Waves glitter like shattered silver. Wind carries salt and warmth. Artemis and Apollo stand together near the shore. Apollo points toward the distant water. Far offshore, barely visible, something moves. A small dark shape rising and falling with waves. "What do you see?" Apollo asks. Artemis narrows her eyes. The object is tiny, almost impossible to identify. A target. Apollo smiles faintly. "You never miss." The words sound simple, yet something feels wrong. Ancient storytellers differ sharply here. Some portray Apollo deliberately deceiving Artemis, knowing the shape is Orion swimming far offshore. Others suggest divine misunderstanding rather than malice. Still others preserve entirely different versions where Orion dies by Scorpion instead. Myth refuses certainty. But the most haunting version remains this one. The contest. The target. The arrow. Artemis lifts her bow. Instinct takes over. Breath slows. Shoulders settle. Wind measured. Distance calculated. Everything she has trained for aligns in perfect discipline. No hesitation. No doubt. This is what perfection looks like. Release. The arrow flies. Silver through sunlight. Impossible distance. Perfect trajectory. A clean strike. The shape disappears beneath water. Silence. Waves continue moving. Nothing else changes. For one heartbeat. 2, 3. Then something inside Artemis shifts. Not knowledge. Recognition. An instinct deeper than sight. Wrong. Something is wrong. She turns toward Apollo. His expression reveals too much. No triumph. No pride. Only terrible knowing. Artemis freezes. The world narrows. Wind disappears. Waves disappear. Only one truth remains. Orion. She runs. Across shore. Into surf. Water crashes against her legs, then waist, then chest. She moves faster than mortal bodies could endure, cutting through sea toward the place where the dark shape vanished. There, floating, still, Orion. The arrow struck true. as it always does. That is the cruelty. Her greatest strength becomes instrument of unbearable loss. She reaches him, hands trembling now, truly trembling perhaps for the first time in centuries. Salt water burns her eyes. Blood spreads into the sea in crimson threads. He is dying, or dead already. Traditions vary, but every version carries the same emotional truth. Artemis understands. Too late. Some myths say Orion opened his eyes once, others give him no final words. Some poets imagined silence between them, because anything spoken would diminish tragedy. Perhaps silence is truer, because what words exist for this? She who never misses has made the one shot she wishes had failed. This is the collapse of perfection, absolute precision, absolute catastrophe. Artemis holds him as waves rise and fall around them. Cold sea, warm blood fading, sky vast above, and grief enters fully. Not abstract sorrow like Niobe, not observed suffering, personal loss, direct, irreversible. This changes everything. Until now, discipline could solve nearly every challenge. Boundaries protected, skill corrected, judgment restored order. None of that matters here. Skill caused the wound. Discipline enabled it. Perfection killed what she cared for. That realization shatters something fundamental. For the first time, Artemis confronts the limit of control. You can do everything correctly and still lose. Ancient Greece understood this deeply. Tragedy rarely comes only through failure. Sometimes tragedy comes through excellence meeting fate. That is more terrifying. Artemis returns to shore carrying Orion. Moonrise begins as daylight fades. Silver light spreads across darkening water. The same moon that once symbolized calm now witnesses grief. Apollo approaches slowly. No defense. No explanation. What could he offer? Whether his role came from jealousy, protection, or tragic misjudgment matters less now. Consequence has arrived, and consequence cannot be recalled. Artemis says nothing. That silence wounds more than anger, because grief has moved beyond accusation into emptiness. Yet fate still has one final transformation to offer. The hunter will not vanish entirely. Soon the stars themselves will change, and Artemis, broken open by grief, will make a choice that ensures Orion is never truly lost. But the cost of that choice will echo through eternity. Grief does not leave Artemis quickly. It settles into her like winter entering stone. After Orion's death, the forests still recognize her, but she moves through them differently. Hounds follow in quieter formation. Nymphs speak more softly around campfires. Even Apollo keeps his distance for a time, because there are wounds no music can soothe, and there are silences even prophecy cannot safely enter. Artemis returns to the mountains, yet the mountains no longer feel untouched. Everywhere she looks, memory waits. A ridge where Orion once stood, a track he once noticed before she did, a shoreline where the sea carried him away. The wilderness had once protected her from emotional confusion, now it preserves what she has lost. Into this wounded season comes Callisto. Callisto, she is one of Artemis's companions, perhaps the most beloved in some traditions. Her name means most beautiful, yet beauty alone does not explain her closeness to the goddess. Callisto is loyal, strong, skilled enough to run with the hunt, gentle enough to comfort younger nymphs after difficult days. She belongs to the sacred sisterhood Artemis created long ago, that chosen circle built on freedom, discipline, and trust. Trust matters now more than ever. After Orion, Artemis needs the company of those who understand silence without demanding confession. Callisto offers that. She does not ask Artemis to speak before she is ready. She walks beside her through cedar groves. She tends the fire when Artemis returns late. She keeps the hounds calm when storms roll over the mountains. Small acts, quiet loyalty, these become healing of a kind. But Greek myth rarely allows healing without testing it. A warning appears first. One evening, as the companions camp beside a river, the moon rises red through smoke from distant fields. The water below reflects it like diluted blood. The nymphs fall silent, uneasy. In ancient belief, unusual moonlight could signal divine disturbance, especially when connected to Artemis. Some would later say this was the sign that Zeus had already turned his gaze toward Callisto. Others believed the omen warned Artemis herself. Even the protected circle was not beyond violation. That is the terror of this myth. Artemis built a world of boundaries, but Zeus is the great breaker of boundaries, and he is her father. The contradiction is almost unbearable. In many traditions, Zeus desires Callisto and approaches her in disguise. Some versions say he takes the form of Artemis herself, making the betrayal especially cruel. Others say he comes as Apollo, or simply overwhelms her through divine power. The details differ, but the emotional center remains. Callisto is violated by a force too powerful to resist. This is not ordinary betrayal. It is desecration of Artemis's protected world. Yet for a time, the truth remains hidden. Callisto returns changed, not visibly at first, but Artemis notices. Of course she notices. She reads broken grass, disturbed air, altered silence. She knows when a deer changes pace from fear. She knows when a hound hides injury. She knows when a companion's laughter no longer reaches her eyes. Still, she does not understand immediately. Or perhaps she refuses to. Because some truths are so painful, they must approach slowly. Months pass in mythic compression. Callisto grows quieter. She avoids bathing with the others. She walks slightly apart. She startles at sudden voices. Artemis sees these signs, and old instincts to protect a judge guardian of sacred vows. But grief has made her more cautious. After Orion's certainty no longer comes as easily. She does not rush to accusation. Then the truth emerges. In many versions it happens during bathing. The companions enter a clear spring and Callisto cannot hide her pregnancy. Water reveals what clothing concealed. The nymphs gasp. Shock spreads through the group. Artemis turns toward Callisto, and in that instant, everything she has built stands at risk. Her vow, her sisterhood, her sacred law, her trust. Callisto trembles. You can imagine the silence, water dripping from hair, wind moving through leaves, no one breathing. Artemis looks at her beloved companion and sees evidence of broken purity. But does she see victimhood? Does she see coercion? Does she understand Zeus's role? Ancient versions disagree painfully. Some portray Artemis as enraged and unforgiving, expelling Callisto for violating her vow. Others place the transformation into a bear in Hera's hands, not Artemis's. Some later interpretations soften Artemis, suggesting she was deceived, bound by divine law, or trapped within a system that punished women for male wrongdoing. The myth does not resolve itself cleanly. That is why it still hurts. If Artemis punishes Callisto, then the protector fails to protect the wounded. If Hera punishes her, Artemis still loses someone under her care. If Zeus caused the suffering, then Artemis confronts a truth she cannot easily punish. The danger comes from her own divine family. No version leaves her untouched. Callisto is transformed into a bear. Whether by Artemis, Hera, or fate itself, the image is devastating. The maiden of the hunt becomes the hunted animal. Her human voice disappears. Her body bends beneath fur and claw. Her child remains part of the story, but her place among companions is gone. Artemis watches the boundary between human and wild collapse in the cruelest way. This transformation mirrors Actaeon, but with terrible reversal. Actaeon crossed into Artemis's sacred space and became prey. Callisto belonged inside that sacred space and was still cast out into animal form. The difference exposes a flaw in Artemis's world. Boundaries protect only when power respects them. Against Zeus, boundaries become fragile. That realization wounds Artemis deeply. She may not show it, but myth lets you feel it. The forest becomes colder, the sisterhood less innocent, trust less complete. Later, Callisto's son Arcas nearly kills his bear mother during a hunt, not recognizing her. Zeus intervenes and places both Callisto and Arcas among the stars as constellations. Some traditions identify them with the Great Bear and the Little Bear forever circling the northern sky. To mortals, it becomes a beautiful ending. To Artemis, perhaps, it is more complicated. A constellation is honor. It is also distance. Callisto is preserved but not restored, seen by all, touched by none. That is often how myth handles irreversible harm. It turns suffering into pattern, grief into stars, memory into worship. You stand with Artemis beneath the night sky as the bare constellation rises. Her face is unreadable, silvered by moonlight. Around her the nymphs remain quiet. No one knows whether to mourn prey or look away. Perhaps Artemis wonders whether her law was too rigid. Perhaps she wonders whether she failed. Perhaps she wonders whether freedom can exist safely in a world ruled by gods like Zeus. This question has no easy answer, but it changes her. After Callisto, Artemis's protection deepens, but so does sorrow. She becomes more compassionate toward vulnerable transitions more closely tied to girls' childbirth and dangerous thresholds. Yet she also becomes more severe toward threats from outside. The contradiction grows sharper because experience has made her wiser and more wounded at once. The lesson is bitter. Not every broken vow is chosen. Not every fallen companion is guilty. Not every wound can be judged by appearances. This is wisdom purchased through loss, and soon that wisdom will face one of her darkest tests. Yet not in a forest, not beneath stars, but on a shore where an army waits for wind. A father raises a knife, and a young girl named Iphigenia walks towards sacrifice. The sea lies still, too still. No sail moves, no mast creaks with strain, no ropes snap in wind. Hundreds of ships wait upon the shore, yet they might as well be carved from stone. Morning light spreads across the harbour, in pale gold reflecting off bronze shields, helmets and spearheads. Fires burn low among camps, where restless soldiers murmur in frustration. Salt hangs heavy in warm air. Gulls circle overhead, crying into an unnatural calm. Something sacred has gone wrong. You stand at Aulis, where the Greek armies gather before sailing to Troy. Kings, princes, warriors, and commanders have assembled for war. Yet war cannot begin. The wind has vanished, not weakened, vanished. Ancient Greeks read nature symbolically. A missing wind was not mere weather, it was message. Divine will had interrupted human ambition. Soon the reason becomes clear. Artemis is angry. Why exactly depends on the version of the myth. Some traditions say King Agamemnon killed one of Artemis's sacred deer. Others claim he boasted that his skill surpassed even the goddesses. Some say he desecrated a sacred grove. Historians and classicists continue debating which version came first, but the underlying truth remains constant. A boundary was crossed, and consequence followed. The winds stopped. The entire Greek war machine now waits upon the judgment of one goddess. That alone reveals how fully Artemis has entered divine power. Once the child of Delos, once the maiden of forests, she now holds kings hostage through silence. No arrows, no storms, only absence. No wind, no movement, no future. Agamemnon grows desperate. Soldiers whisper. Supplies diminish. Tension spreads across the camp like heat. Eventually, the seer Calchas speaks the truth no one wishes to hear. Artemis demands sacrifice. Not gold, not cattle, not ritual incense. A life. And not just any life. Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. The name lands like stone in water ripples, spreading through every conscience present. This is the moment Artemis faces one of the most morally difficult chapters of her entire mythology. The protector of young women now stands associated with the possible death of a young woman. The contradiction feels almost unbearable. Why would Artemis demand this? Ancient interpretations vary. Some argue the sacrifice reflects ritual substitution myths, where symbolic death becomes transformation. Others see the story as critique of war itself, men willing to kill daughters for glory. Some religious scholars believe Artemis here embodies terrible sacred law, exposing what arrogance costs when power is abused. All are possible. None fully ease the discomfort. Agamemnon makes his choice, or perhaps avoids choosing by allowing events to continue. That ambiguity matters. He sends for Iphigenia under false pretenses, telling her she will marry the great warrior Achilles. Marriage instead of sacrifice. Celebration instead of death. Deception. Again, myth returns to violated trust. Iphigenia arrives. You can almost hear her footsteps across the camp. Sand beneath sandals. Fabric moving in sea air. Young hope in her eyes. Perhaps nervous excitement. Perhaps confusion at the strange mood among soldiers. Her mother accompanies her in some traditions, adding even more emotional weight. She does not yet know, but omens surround her. Temple accounts speak of disturbed flames. Birds flying strangely, dogs whining near altars. Ancient audiences would immediately recognize the symbolism. Fate is closing. Artemis watches. This is where her character becomes extraordinarily complex. Is she coldly demanding blood? Is she testing human morality? Is she waiting to see whether Agamemnon will truly proceed? Myth refuses certainty. Perhaps that uncertainty is the point. Sometimes divine silence reveals human character more than divine intention. What men choose under pressure becomes the true judgment. As the ritual approaches, truth emerges. Iphigenia understands. Marriage was a lie. The altar waits. The knife waits. Her father stands broken between ambition and love. This is the emotional center of the myth, not spectacle. Choice. What is sacrificed for war? How much innocence must power consume? Ancient Greek tragedy later turned this story into devastating drama because it speaks beyond mythology. It asks a question every civilization must face. What are leaders willing to destroy for victory? And Artemis stands at the center of that question. You imagine her watching from beyond mortal sight, moon-cold and silent. Perhaps she sees not just a girl, but every vulnerable life caught beneath decisions made by powerful men. Perhaps Callisto echoes in memory. Perhaps Orion, perhaps Leto, all the women harmed by pride, desire, ambition and entitlement. The altar becomes symbolic of all of them. Iphigenia walks forward. Ancient retellings differ here in emotional tone. Some portray her terrified, others astonishingly brave. In the tragedies of later Greek playwrights, she sometimes chooses sacrifice, willingly accepting death for Greece. Whether historical religion believed this literally matters less than what the story communicates. Innocence often bears the cost of others' ambition. The knife rises. Time slows, sea remains still. No wind, no sound. Then, intervention. This is where Artemis transforms the myth. In many versions, just before death, the goddess acts. A cloud descends. Mist fills the altar. Vision blurs. When clarity returns, Iphigenia is gone. In her place lies a deer, sacrificial substitute. Artemis has taken the girl, saved her, removed her from death. This detail changes everything. The goddess who seemed to demand blood becomes rescuer. But even rescue carries ambiguity. Why wait so long? Why permit terror? Why allow deception to reach its peak? Again, mythology resists comforting answers. Some scholars argue Artemis never truly wanted Iphigenia dead. She wanted revelation exposure of human willingness to sacrifice innocence. Others interpret the substitution as ancient ritual evolution, moving from human sacrifice traditions toward animal sacrifice symbolism. Emotionally, one truth remains. Artemis spares the girl and takes her away. In many traditions, Iphigenia becomes priestess of Artemis in a distant land, serving the goddess thereafter. The rescued maiden becomes sacred servant, forever linked to the deity who both threatened and saved her. Protection through transformation, another recurring Artemis pattern. She rarely restores life exactly as it was. She moves people across thresholds, child to priestess, victim to sacred figure, near death to altered purpose. This reveals something profound. Artemis is not goddess of comfort. She is goddess of thresholds. Thresholds hurt. They involve endings. They demand surrender. But they also create transformation. The winds return, slowly at first, then stronger. Sails stir, ropes tighten. The fleet can finally move toward Troy. War begins. But something inside Artemis has changed again. She has now stood at the intersection of justice, sacrifice, innocence, and mercy. Each myth adds complexity to her once clear worldview. Boundaries still matter, law still matters, but wisdom increasingly requires discernment beyond rigid rule. She understands something deeper now. Not every test exists to end in punishment. Some exist to reveal, some to transform, some to expose human hearts. As the Greek ships disappear across the horizon, sea wind finally moving against your face, Artemis turns away from war. Her gaze returns to quieter domains. Women in labour, young girls at thresholds, sacred groves, moonlit mountains. Because another dimension of her power is about to come into full focus. The huntress of death will soon reveal why frightened mothers whisper her name during birth, and there lies one of her greatest contradictions of all. Night has fallen over a small Greek village. Oil lamps glow behind clay windows. Smoke rises from low rooftops and drifts into the cold air. Dogs bark in the distance, then quiet. Somewhere nearby an infant begins to cry, only to be soothed by tired voices. The scent of olive oil, ash wool and warm bread hangs softly in the darkness. Yet inside one house, peace has vanished. A woman is in labour. Her breathing comes in broken waves. Sweat clings to her skin despite the chill outside. Hands grip wool blankets so tightly her knuckles pale. Older women move around her with urgent rhythm, boiling water, preparing cloth, whispering prayers. Pain rises and falls like a storm tide, but each wave returns stronger. Fear spreads through the room, not because childbirth is rare, but because everyone here understands a brutal truth of the ancient world. Birth is dangerous, terribly dangerous. In the modern imagination, Artemis is often remembered only as huntress moon goddess and protector of wilderness. Yet for countless ancient women, one role mattered just as deeply. They prayed to Artemis during childbirth. This feels paradoxical at first. The eternal maiden, the goddess who never married, the goddess who never bore children. Why would she become protector of labour? And yet this contradiction reveals one of the deepest truths about her life. Artemis understood birth before almost anyone, because she helped deliver Apollo moments after her own birth. Pain entered her story immediately, not as personal suffering alone, as witness suffering. She watched her mother Leto endure agony, exile and vulnerability. That memory, whether literal or symbolic, never leaves her mythology. Artemis becomes linked to the threshold where life enters the world, and thresholds are her sacred domain. That is the key. Artemis is not goddess of motherhood itself. She is goddess of transition into it. The moment between danger and survival, between blood and breath, between fear and first cry, that moment belongs to her. You sit in the dark corner of the labouring room as the women pray. One whispers Artemis's name under trembling breath. Another places a small silver charm near the bed, crescent-shaped, polished, smooth by years of handling. Tiny offerings like these have been found in archaeological contexts near sanctuaries associated with childbirth. Surviving evidence suggests women across parts of Greece invoked Artemis as guardian during labour, especially when birth became difficult. Prayer becomes rhythm. Pain, breath, prayer, pain, breath. Outside, moonlight spills across stone paths. Inside, time narrows. This is where Artemis's compassion becomes impossible to ignore. Many myths emphasize her wrath, discipline, and severity, but severity alone cannot explain why mothers trusted her with their lives. Something else must coexist beneath the arrows. Compassion, not soft sentiment, protective compassion. There is a difference. Artemis does not soothe through illusions. She protects through presence at the edge of danger. She understands terror without pretending terror is absent. That makes her powerful in childbirth. Because labour strips away performance. Status vanishes. Beauty vanishes. Control vanishes. Only endurance remains. Artemis respects endurance. She respects bodies pushed to sacred limits. That respect deepens her bond with mortal women. Perhaps more than any Olympian except Demeter, Artemis becomes intimately tied to women's lived vulnerability. Girls prayed to her before adulthood. Mothers prayed during birth. Families offered thanks after safe delivery. Even death in childbirth sometimes brought offerings to her shrines. This duality matters. She could protect. She could also bring sudden death. Ancient Greeks understood divine power as double-edged. The same deity who grants safety may govern danger. Artemis embodies this with unsettling clarity. Her arrows could symbolize swift death in women and children, yet her favor could also preserve life. Why both? Because birth itself contains both. Life and death stand terrifyingly close during labor. Artemis governs that threshold. The laboring woman cries out again, longer, raw. Then something shifts. The older women exchange glances. The child is coming. Fear peaks. This final stage of labor carries terrible uncertainty. In ancient households, without modern medicine, outcomes could turn suddenly. Hemorrhage, infection, obstruction, exhaustion. Death could arrive within moments. The women pray louder, Artemis, Artemis, Artemis. You imagine the goddess hearing thousands of such prayers across centuries. Not from kings, not from generals, not from proud hunters, from frightened women gripping life with bloodied hands. This matters for Artemis's character arc, because over time, her relationship with vulnerability evolves profoundly. Early Artemis defended boundaries through law. Later, Artemis increasingly understands vulnerability through experience. Orion taught grief. Callisto taught injustice. Iphigenia taught sacrifice. Now childbirth reveals raw mortality. Each experience softens certainty while deepening wisdom. Protection becomes less abstract, more compassionate. Some ancient hymns describe Artemis as both terrible and kind in labor, bringing either sharp pain or swift relief, according to divine will. That contradiction may feel harsh to modern ears, but myth often encodes reality through deity. Childbirth itself can feel merciless or merciful without warning. Artemis becomes the sacred face of that uncertainty. Then, a cry. Not the mother. Smaller, new, sharp, alive. The child has emerged. Relief crashes through the room, like released breath after drowning. Women weep. One laughs from exhaustion. The mother collapses backward, trembling, and half-conscious tears mixing with sweat. The newborn cries again, lungs filling with first air. Life, warm, fragile, miraculous. The silver charm beside the bed glints in lamplight. Artemis's presence feels almost tangible, not visible, felt, in the exhale after terror, in the warmth of survival, in the first cry. This is why Artemis endures so deeply in religious memory. She governs not only grand myths, but intimate human moments. Most worshippers did not meet gods in epic battle. They met them in fear, illness, storms, hunger, and birth. Artemis mattered because thresholds matter, and every human life begins at one. Over time, temple worship reflects this symbolism more richly. Young girls served in rituals honoring Artemis before adulthood. In places like Broron, some ceremonies involved girls symbolically playing the bear, a ritual scholars still debate. Some researchers believe these rites mark transition from childhood toward maturity under Artemis's protection. The symbolism is striking. Wild child, growing body, approaching womanhood, dangerous threshold, sacred transition. Again and again, Artemis stands there, not forcing movement, guarding it. This reveals something profound about why she is remembered. She does not represent possession. She represents becoming. Becoming is uncomfortable. Becoming hurts. Becoming often requires letting go of former selves. Artemis understands this better than almost any god, because her entire life has been a series of thresholds. Child to huntress, guardian to judge, judge to mourner, protector to wiser protector, and still transformation continues. Moonlight deepens outside the village. The newborn finally quiets. The mother sleeps. Sacred calm returns. But high above the mortal world, Artemis stands upon a ridge beneath silver stars looking toward forests and distant temples alike. She has become something far larger than a huntress. She's now guardian of every fragile crossing between one life and the next. And soon, that symbolic power will reach its fullest form. Because Artemis is about to become more than goddess of forests or childbirth. She will become the living embodiment of thresholds themselves. The goddess of wild borders, the keeper of all in-between places. By now, Artemis is worshipped across mountains, valleys, islands, harbour towns, and sacred groves throughout the Greek world. Her name travels on the lips of hunters, maidens, mothers, priestesses, and travellers crossing dangerous roads at dusk. Yet if you ask 10 worshippers who Artemis truly is, you may hear 10 different answers. Huntress, moon goddess, protector of girls, guardian of childbirth, keeper of wild animals, divine archer. Each answer holds truth, none alone is complete. Because Artemis has become something harder to define. She has become a threshold, not a goddess standing beside thresholds. A threshold embodied. This may be the deepest way to understand her. You walk with her at twilight, the hour she seems to love most. Day has not fully surrendered yet. Night has already begun its quiet ascent. Shadows stretch across olive groves. The sky holds fading gold near the horizon and deepening indigo above. Crickets begin their evening chorus. Cool air brushes your skin after the warmth of day. Everything feels suspended between states. Exactly where Artemis is strongest. Between. That word explains her life. She exists between civilization and wilderness, between childhood and adulthood, between safety and danger, between life and death, between purity and blood, between solitude and connection, between mercy and judgment. She governs crossings, and crossings are where humans feel most vulnerable. Ancient Greeks understood liminal spaces with extraordinary seriousness. Doorways, crossroads, shorelines, city gates, riverbanks, cave entrances and mountain passes were never merely geographic. They carried spiritual meaning because they marked transitions from one condition to another. Many sacred rites centered on crossing such boundaries. Artemis naturally became associated with them because her mythology repeatedly returns to transformation. Actaeon crossed a forbidden boundary. Callisto crossed unwillingly from maiden to exile. Iphigenia crossed from sacrifice to sacred service. Women in labor crossed toward motherhood. Even Orion crossed from life into memory among stars. Every major myth has prepared you for this understanding. Nothing in Artemis's story stands isolated. Everything converges here. This realization changes how you understand her severity. Earlier in her life, her punishments could appear harsh, almost cold. But now something deeper becomes visible. Artemis does not defend rules simply because rules matter. She defends thresholds because thresholds are dangerous. When someone crosses them carelessly, harm spreads outward. Children become vulnerable. Bodies become vulnerable. Trust becomes vulnerable. Communities become vulnerable. Boundaries exist not only to restrict freedom, they often protect becoming. That distinction transforms her character. It also explains why mortals feared and loved her simultaneously. You begin seeing this reflected in her sacred spaces. Artemis's shrines rarely feel identical to the grand civic temples of gods like Athena or Apollo. Many of her oldest sanctuaries remain tied to wilderness groves, springs, forest clearings, marshlands, hillsides where wind never fully stops moving. Even when marble temples rise in her honor, something wild often remains nearby. Trees, water, animal paths, untamed ground. Civilization never fully contains her. That symbolism matters. Artemis reminds humans that no society completely conquers nature. There will always remain spaces beyond total control. Inner spaces too. Desire, fear, instinct, grief. These also resist domestication. Perhaps that is why Artemis remains psychologically powerful even in modern readings. She embodies the part of the self that refuses full assimilation into external expectation. The self that says there must remain territory no one owns, sacred interior wilderness. You sense this in her relationships as well. Her bond with Apollo has evolved from twin certainty into mature mutual respect. The wound of Orion, the grief of Callisto, the moral ambiguity of Iphigenia, each has changed her. Apollo sees it. He notices how her judgments have become quieter, more reflective, less immediate, not weaker, wiser. One evening, the twins stand above a moonlit valley. Villages below glow with scattered firelight. The scent of cedar and distant hearth smoke rises with cold air. Apollo speaks. You hesitate more. Years ago, Artemis might have treated that as criticism. Now she answers differently. I see more. Simple. Profound. That may summarize her evolution better than anything else. As youth, she saw boundaries clearly. As maturity deepened, she saw consequences beyond the boundary. Wisdom expanded perception. She now understands that violation, guilt, innocence, coercion, grief, and responsibility often intertwine. This is not loss of conviction. It is maturation of judgment. That is the true difference between power and wisdom. Power acts. Wisdom sees context before acting. Artemis has become wise. Yet wisdom brings sorrow too. Seeing more means carrying more complexity. The world no longer divides cleanly between sacred and profane, innocent and guilty, deserving and undeserving. Reality contains shadows. Moonlight becomes perfect symbolism here. Sunlight reveals sharply. Moonlight reveals gently. Partially, enough to navigate, not enough to claim total certainty. Artemis has become moonlight in moral form. She illuminates. She leaves mystery intact. Ancient worship increasingly reflects this layered understanding. Priests, priestesses, and worshippers bring different prayers to her altars, depending on their threshold. Young girls pray for safe maturity. Hunters pray for discipline and success. Travelers pray before crossing dangerous passes. Mothers pray during labor. Those grieving pray for strength to survive transformation. Artemis becomes a goddess people seek when life enters unstable territory. That may explain her enduring memory more than any single myth. Everyone crosses thresholds. No one avoids them forever. Then comes a final omen of this phase. Artemis dreams once more. She stands in a vast forest where every season exists at once. Snow rests on pine branches while spring flowers bloom below. Summer heat shimmers over distant stones while autumn leaves drift silently through the air. Time itself feels suspended. Ahead stands a doorway. No walls, only a doorway. Marble frame rising from earth. Empty center. Beyond it, darkness filled with stars. She approaches. At the threshold waits a deer, not ordinary. A silver stag from earlier visions. Older now, calmer. Its eyes hold neither warning nor fear. Recognition. It steps through the doorway, disappears into stars. Artemis wakes and understands, not with words, with instinct. She herself has become that doorway. Others will pass. She will remain. Guardian, witness, threshold. This realization brings not pride but stillness, acceptance. She no longer needs to define herself through singular titles. She is not only huntress, not only maiden, not only judge. She has become something more spacious, more symbolic, more eternal. But destiny is not finished. The wild goddess of thresholds will soon step beyond Greece itself. Her worship will expand, transform, merge with older powers, and take on forms even early Greeks could scarcely imagine. Marble temples are rising, empires are shifting, and in one great city called Ephesus, Artemis is about to become far larger than the moonlit huntress of old. Time widens now. The myths of Artemis no longer belong only to mountains, forests, and whispered prayers beneath moonlit trees. Her presence begins taking physical form in stone cedar beams, carved ivory, incense, smoke, and sacred flame. Across the Greek world, shrines rise in her honor. Some are small, nothing more than an altar beside a spring where wildflowers grow through cracked stone. Others become grand sanctuaries visited by pilgrims traveling for days across dust-filled roads. Everywhere you go, one truth becomes clear. Artemis is no longer only a goddess of stories. She is a goddess of ritual. That transition matters. Stories shape imagination. Ritual shapes civilization. When a deity becomes woven into repeated communal action offerings, festivals, vows, rites of passage, their influence deepens beyond narrative. Artemis has reached that stage. She lives now in collective memory, in habit, in embodied worship. You arrive at dawn at one of her sacred sanctuaries. Mist still hangs low over the earth. Cypress trees stand dark and still against pale morning sky. The scent of damp soil mixes with olive oil and ash from fires lit before sunrise. Pilgrims approach in silence carrying baskets of fruit. Small silver tokens, honey cakes, ribbons, and animal figurines carved from wood or clay. Some walk barefoot, some carry children, some carry grief. Each has come for a threshold. That pattern continues. A mother brings her daughter approaching womanhood. A hunter seeks blessing before winter. A woman offers thanks after surviving childbirth. A traveller prays before crossing mountains. Artemis receives all of them, not because their circumstances match, but because vulnerability unites them. This is the genius of her worship. She became relevant to ordinary life. Ancient religion survived not only through epic myths, but through practical emotional need. People returned to gods who mattered during dangerous transitions. Artemis mattered deeply. You watch a ritual unfold. Priestesses move with deliberate calm. White garments brush cold stone floors. Bronze bowls catch early light. Sacred water is poured. Oil flames flicker. A chant begins low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The sound fills the sanctuary not with dramatic intensity but with slow gravity. Sleepy, steady, sacred, almost like breathing. It is easy to imagine why ritual around Artemis could feel soothing despite her fearsome reputation. Her worship acknowledged danger without panic. The sacred message was not that life becomes safe, it was that danger can be crossed under protection. That distinction comforts. Some researchers believe many Artemis sanctuaries preserved elements of pre-Greek goddess worship, especially linked to fertility, wild animals, and moon symbolism. Surviving evidence suggests local traditions often merged older regional beliefs into Artemis's identity. This helps explain why her cult appears so diverse across regions. In one city, she is fierce huntress. In another, childbirth guardian. Elsewhere, protector of marshes, animals, maidens, or sacred groves. At first, this variety may seem contradictory, but by now, contradiction no longer surprises you. Contradiction is Artemis. She expands without losing essence, because essence was never limited to one image. Her essence is guardianship of thresholds. Thresholds appear everywhere. This expansion changes how people visualize her. Not every worshipper imagines the same Artemis who ran through moonlit forests with bow and hounds. For some, she becomes more symbolic, less personal, an ideal, a sacred force embedded in civic life. This raises an interesting question. What happens when living symbols become institutional? Something is gained, something is lost. Temples preserve memory. They can also domesticate wildness. Artemis's mythology resists easy domestication. Yet marble inevitably changes perception. The forest goddess who once moved unseen through pine mist now stands as statue carved, framed, elevated. Worshippers look upward from below. Distance increases, reverence formalizes. Would young Artemis have welcomed this? The question lingers. Perhaps she accepts temples because mortals need structure for devotion. Perhaps part of her always remains beyond stone. Many sanctuaries subtly acknowledge this tension by preserving sacred groves nearby, allowing worshippers to encounter both architecture and wilderness, civilization, wildness. Together, again threshold. You notice another change. Children. So many children at her temples. Girls especially. Temple traditions in places like Brauron involved rites for young girls approaching maturity. Some ceremonies included symbolic animal roles, especially bears. Historians continue debating the exact meaning, but most agree these rituals mark transition. Childhood was being honored before surrendering to adult expectation. This emotional layer is profound. Artemis protects not only innocence, but the last sacred space before innocence transforms. That may explain why her worship became especially meaningful for girls. In a world where adulthood often meant rapid transition into marriage and social duty, Artemis represented a rare sacred acknowledgement of untamed youth. You do not rush a threshold, you honor it. That feels deeply humane, perhaps more than earlier myths revealed, and Artemis herself continues evolving through worship. This may sound strange, but gods in mythology often change as human understanding changes. The deity worshipped by later generations is not always identical to the deity imagined earlier. Collective devotion reshapes divine identity. Artemis experiences this. She becomes larger, more layered, less purely Greek in old Olympian terms, more ancient, more universal. The moon goddess of forests begins merging with something older and wider, an archetypal sacred feminine force tied to nature, fertility, protection, and cosmic rhythm. Even Apollo notices. During one quiet meeting near a sanctuary, he studies offerings piled high around her altar. "You have become difficult to contain," he says. There is gentle humor in his voice. Artemis looks over the shrine. "I was never containable." Apollo smiles. True, yet the statement carries deeper truth than either needs to speak aloud. No temple contains Artemis fully. No myth contains her fully. No title contains her fully. She remains larger than representation. That realization becomes especially important because one sanctuary will soon redefine her image more radically than any other. Not in Athens, not in Sparta, not in a forest shrine, in a great city of trade, wealth, and cultural exchange, Ephesus. There, Artemis will transform so dramatically that future generations may scarcely recognize the huntress of Delos. Her bow will not disappear, but something far older will rise beside it. Something tied to fertility, abundance, cosmic motherhood, and sacred mystery. The silver goddess is about to become vast, and one temple will help make her immortal far beyond Greece. When you arrive at Ephesus, the first thing you notice is scale. This is not a quiet mountain sanctuary or a hidden spring beneath cedar trees. This is a thriving city of trade, language, ritual, and movement. Merchants call from crowded streets. Bronze tools ring against stone. Incense smoke rises from market shrines. Foreign accents blend in the air, Greek, Anatolian, Persian, and others lost to time. Salt from the nearby sea mixes with spices, wool, olive oil, and warm dust. Everything feels expansive, restless, alive. And at the center of this world rises something extraordinary. The Temple of Artemis, one of the great wonders of the ancient world. Even before entering, you feel the shift. This is not merely a temple, it is declaration. Marble columns tower upward in astonishing symmetry, catching sunlight so brilliantly they seem to glow. Pilgrims gather in streams. Priests move with ceremonial precision. Offerings pile high. Sacred chants echo between stone surfaces, creating a sound both grand and strangely intimate. Artemis has become monumental, but something deeper changes here. You look upon her image inside the sanctuary and stop. This is not the Artemis you first met. Not the lean huntress of moonlit forests. Not the bow-bearing maiden racing beside hounds. The Artemis of Ephesus looks radically different. Her form is frontal, still almost cosmic. She is richly adorned with layered garments and sacred symbols. Animals appear around her body, lions, bulls, bees, deer. Her torso bears the famous rounded forms scholars still debate today. Many interpret them as multiple breasts symbolizing nourishment and fertility. Others argue they may represent ritual objects, gourds, bull testicles, or symbolic offerings. Historians continue debating. That uncertainty matters. Mystery survives. But one truth is undeniable. Here, Artemis has become abundance. This transformation surprises many modern readers because it seems contradictory. How does the eternal virgin become associated with fertility and nourishment? How does the fiercely autonomous huntress become linked to maternal symbolism? The answer lies in cultural layering. Ephesus did not simply import Greek Artemis unchanged. The city absorbed her into older Anatolian goddess traditions, especially those tied to earth fertility, protection, and cosmic life. Over time, identities merged. Greek Artemis remained. Older goddess traditions remained. Together they formed something larger, a fusion. Threshold again, Artemis crossing from one religious world into another. She changes, but she remains herself. That paradox is remarkable. At first glance, the huntress and the Ephesian goddess seem incompatible. Look deeper. They are not. What has Artemis always protected? Thresholds of life, childhood to adulthood, pregnancy to birth, safety to danger, life to death. Now at Ephesus, those thresholds expand to cosmic scale. She is no longer only guardian of individual transitions. She becomes guardian of life's generative abundance itself. Not motherhood as domestic identity, life force as sacred mystery. That distinction helps. She still belongs to untamed sacred power. Only now that power includes creation on a wider scale. You walk through the temple as worship continues. The floor feels cool beneath bare feet. Lamps burn in long rows. Honey oil wine and incense fill the air with thick sweetness. Pilgrims kneel in silence. Some weep. Some whisper prayers into folded hands. Some simply stare upward, overwhelmed. That reaction makes sense. The Temple of Artemis inspired awe, not only through theology, but through architecture. Surviving evidence suggests it was enormous, richly decorated and funded through immense regional devotion. It functioned as sanctuary, treasury, pilgrimage center, and sacred economic hub. Artemis now influences not only hearts, she influences economies, politics, identity, civilization. Would young Artemis of Delos recognize this version of herself? An unsettling question. Would the barefoot huntress who rejected confinement accept becoming center of one of the largest temples in the ancient world? Perhaps not at first. Yet perhaps she would understand something essential. Power evolves through relationship. The more humans encounter a deity, the more they reveal what they need from that deity. Ephesus reveals something profound about human need. People needed Artemis to be larger than wilderness alone. They needed protection, not only from predators and childbirth, but from instability itself. Economic uncertainty, foreign invasion, disease, famine, loss. They needed cosmic assurance. Artemis became that assurance. Apollo visits her temple in one imagined moment, studying the massive sanctuary with quiet amusement. You truly became impossible to define, he says. Artemis stands before her Ephesian image. Moonlight once defined her. Now lampfire dances across carved stone. She answers softly, "Perhaps I always was." Apollo says nothing, because he knows she is right. This is the culmination of everything her life has become. She began as a girl asking for freedom. She became huntress, judge, protector, mourner, guardian of thresholds. Now she transcends even those forms. She becomes archetype, something beyond biography. And yet, the personal life you have followed still matters, because symbols endure most powerfully when rooted in lived story. Her compassion comes from Leto, her grief from Orion, her moral complexity from Callisto and Iphigenia, her wisdom from consequence. Without that life, the symbol becomes hollow. With that life, the symbol breathes. Then comes another omen. Late at night, after the temple quiets and most pilgrims sleep, Artemis walks alone through the inner sanctuary. Lamps burn low, shadows stretch between columns. Outside, sea wind brushes stone. She pauses before her own sacred image. For a strange moment, myth bends inward. The goddess looks at representation of herself. Who is she now? Ancient religion rarely asked this question directly, but you can feel its psychological force. When identity expands through centuries of worship, what remains essential? Artemis closes her eyes and sees the forest. Not marble, pine, mist, moonlight, the silver stag, running, free. She understands. The temple is not prison, because essence remains wild, no matter how vast the shrine becomes. No matter how many titles accumulate, no matter how many cultures reinterpret her, one truth remains unchanged. She cannot be possessed. Not by mortals, not by cities, not by temples, not even by myth itself. That's why Artemis endures. She is sacred power without ownership, freedom without apology, protection without surrender. And soon, that power will move again, not through temples this time, but through memory carried by heroes, travelers, and generations who invoke her name long after old shrines begin to crumble. The silver goddess is becoming immortal in a new way, not through stone, through memory. Stone cracks, empires rise and fall, sacred fires burn bright for centuries, then dim into ash. Temples that once echoed with hymns eventually stand silent beneath rain and wind. Yet memory travels more lightly than marble. It crosses borders, languages, and generations. Long after the earliest sanctuaries of Artemis begin weathering under time, Her presence continues moving through story. This is how immortality deepens, not through stone, through remembrance. By now, Artemis no longer belongs only to priesthoods or formal ritual. She lives inside the imagination of heroes, hunters, mothers, travelers, and storytellers. Her name becomes invocation, warning, blessing, symbol. Even those who never stand in her temple still carry her into dangerous moments. That is extraordinary power. You begin to notice how often heroes move beneath her influence, even when she does not appear directly. Greek myth is filled with visible gods, but often their deepest influence comes through absence. A decision shaped by remembered teaching, a boundary respected because an old story lingers, a prayer whispered before entering uncertainty. Artemis excels in this invisible influence, because thresholds rarely announce themselves dramatically. Sometimes the most important crossings happen quietly. A child becoming adult, a traveler choosing courage, a hunter deciding restraint, a woman enduring pain, a leader choosing mercy over pride. Artemis lives in those moments. You walk through different ages of Greece, as if through drifting moonlight. A young hunter kneels before entering winter forest. He places 2 arrows on a shrine and whispers for discipline, not luck. That detail matters. Luck belongs to chance. Discipline belongs to choice. Artemis's worship always leaned toward cultivated awareness rather than passive hope. Elsewhere, a young girl stands before marriage rites. Her hands tremble slightly. Childhood is ending. The known self is dissolving into unfamiliar expectation. She touches a small silver charm and whispers Artemis's name, not to avoid change, but to survive it with integrity. Again, threshold. Again, Artemis. In another place, a mother keeps vigil beside a feverish child. Oil lamp nearly empty, night long and uncertain. She remembers stories of the goddess who governs sudden illness and sudden recovery. Her prayer contains no theology, only desperation. Artemis, please. Sometimes faith is no more complex than that. This is why her legacy survives so deeply. The gods most remembered are often those tied to repeated human vulnerability. Artemis remained relevant because vulnerability never disappears from civilization. Even heroes need her. Consider great warriors. Ancient storytellers often placed heroic strength beside catastrophic arrogance. Many heroes died, not because they lacked power, but because they lost respect for boundaries. Artemis's mythology quietly resists that pattern. Her influence reminds heroes that mastery without restraint becomes destruction. This makes her unusually important in heroic culture. She teaches discipline before action, awareness before force, respect before conquest. These lessons sound simple. They are not. Even now, humans struggle with them. Some traditions connect Artemis with figures like Atalanta, the fierce huntress raised in wilderness, swift beyond ordinary men, and resistant to conventional expectations. Though their myths remain distinct, symbolic parallels are obvious. Atalanta embodies something Artemis represents: powerfully female excellence outside domesticated roles. That symbolism matters across generations. Artemis becomes reference point for exceptional women, not because they imitate her perfectly, because they invoke her autonomy. This may be one reason later cultures repeatedly reinterpret her. The image of an independent feminine sacred force remains psychologically potent across eras. Some emphasize purity, others wilderness, others strength, protection, or freedom. Each age sees different moonlight, but the moon remains. Then there are the sailors. This surprises some modern readers, yet Artemis's influence extended beyond forests into liminal coastal spaces as well. Shorelines are thresholds to land becoming sea safety, becoming uncertainty. Before long, voyages' offerings to protective deities often included Artemis in local traditions. You stand on a dock at dusk. Ships rock gently. Rope creaks. Salt wind chills skin. Lantern light flickers across wet wood. A captain pauses before boarding. He touches a carved deer charm tied near the mast. No grand ritual, just habit, memory, protection. He sails. Artemis travels with him as idea. That may be her greatest evolution in legacy. She becomes portable, not confined to sacred geography. Wherever thresholds exist, she can be invoked. This portability allows memory to outlive institutions. Temples may fall, stories adapt, symbols travel. Artemis survives. Yet survival in memory always transforms meaning. The Artemis remembered by later generations is often less literal goddess and more archetype. Philosophers reinterpret her symbolically. Poets emphasize moonlight and solitude. Mystics see sacred feminine mystery. Artists return again and again to the bow, the deer, the crescent moon, the untouched forest. Why these images? Because symbols compress truth. Bow focus, deer wild innocence, moon partial revelation, forest untamed self. Together they form psychological language. Artemis becomes readable even outside religious belief. That is rare. Then comes a quiet scene that perhaps says more than grand mythology. An old storyteller sits beside a fire, telling children the story of Actaeon. He lowers his voice when describing the sacred spring. The children lean closer. Some feel fear, some awe. One little girl listens differently, not frightened, thoughtful. Later, she asks, why was Artemis alone? The old storyteller pauses. A beautiful question. Not why she punished, why she remained apart. That question reaches the emotional core of Artemis's legacy. Why solitude? Why independence? Why refusal? As centuries pass, more people ask that question, and answers evolve. Some say she feared attachment. Some say she valued freedom above all. Some say she embodied sacred selfhood impossible within ordinary relational structures. Perhaps all hold fragments. Or perhaps Artemis endures precisely because she resists final explanation. Mystery protects sacred power. Not every symbol should collapse into certainty. Moonlight again teaches this. It illuminates enough. Not everything. Tonight, as you walk beside her legacy, you begin sensing that Artemis no longer needs temples or visible miracles to remain alive. She lives wherever someone chooses integrity over pressure, wherever someone protects vulnerable boundaries, wherever someone refuses possession, wherever someone honors transition instead of rushing through it. That is immortality of a different kind, not worship alone. Pattern, archetype, presence. And now only one question remains. Why across thousands of years did mortals need Artemis so deeply? The answer lies beyond myth. It lies inside human nature itself. By the time Artemis has passed from living ritual into enduring memory, something remarkable has happened. She is no longer only a goddess you worship. She has become a question you carry. This may be the clearest sign of true mythic longevity. Some figures survive because they entertain, others because they symbolize power. But the rarest survive because they continue asking humanity difficult questions generation after generation. Artemis became one of those rare figures, because beneath every myth about deer arrows, moonlight, sacred groves, and divine wrath lies a deeper human longing. Freedom, not abstract political freedom, something more intimate. Freedom to remain yourself. Freedom not to be possessed. Freedom to protect sacred interior space. This is why mortals needed Artemis, far more than they perhaps understood. You live in a world, ancient or modern, filled with forces that attempt to define you. Family expectations, social roles, desire, duty, ambition, fear, love, obligation. These forces shape identity constantly. Some nourish growth, some consume it. Most humans spend large portions of life negotiating what belongs to others and what must remain their own. Artemis speaks directly into that tension. She asks a radical question. What part of you belongs only to you? The question sounds simple. It is not. Ancient Greek society, especially for women, offered limited autonomy. Identity often moved through roles already prepared by family and culture. Daughter, wife, mother, widow, priestess. Each role carried expectations. Artemis stood outside those structures in extraordinary fashion, not because those roles were inherently lesser, because she revealed something culture often forgets. Personhood precedes role. That idea carries immense psychological force, even today, perhaps especially today. This helps explain why Artemis never disappeared entirely, even after the religious world that first worshipped her changed. She continued resonating because the human struggle between belonging and autonomy never ends. Too much isolation wounds. Too much possession also wounds. Where is the balance? Artemis never offers an easy formula. She embodies one extreme radical autonomy, yet her story complicates that ideal through grief, love, and consequence. That complexity makes her believable. If Artemis had remained flawless, she would feel distant. Instead, her life reveals cost. Freedom has cost. That matters. She gained independence. She lost certain forms of intimacy. She protected boundaries. She sometimes became severe. She avoided possession. She also experienced loneliness. The myth does not hide these costs. That honesty deepens her power. Because Artemis is not fantasy without consequence. She is choice with consequence. That makes her humanly meaningful. You think of Orion. Perhaps no relationship reveals Artemis more fully. Orion mattered because he threatened nothing externally. He respected her, understood silence, honored boundaries, yet precisely because he offered safe connection, he exposed the deepest truth of Artemis's life. Even chosen solitude carries longing. This is essential. Artemis is not remembered because she rejected all love. She is remembered because she forced humanity to examine love's relationship with freedom. Can love exist without possession? Can closeness honor autonomy? Can devotion avoid control? These questions remain alive because Artemis never fully resolves them. She lives inside them. Then there is another reason mortals needed her. Protection. Not only physical protection, psychological protection. There are parts of human life especially vulnerable to intrusion. Childhood, bodily autonomy, sexual safety, emotional boundaries, grief transition, identity formation. Artemis became sacred defender of precisely these spaces. Notice how modern this feels. Because vulnerability has not disappeared. Children still need protection. Bodies still need boundaries. Young people still struggle to become themselves under pressure. Women still navigate power, expectation, and safety. The outer forms change. The emotional realities remain. Artemis survives because she speaks to enduring vulnerability. Ancient worshippers may not have used modern language like autonomy, consent, psychological boundaries, or identity formation. Yet myth often preserves truths before formal vocabulary exists. Artemis encoded those truths symbolically. Sacred grove, protected spring, untouched forest. These were never only places, they were inner metaphors. There must exist places not open to violation. This may be Artemis's deepest symbolic gift. Sacred no. The ability to say no without apology. The right to maintain boundary. The legitimacy of refusal. Many cultures struggle with honoring refusal, especially from those expected to accommodate others. Artemis stands as mythic refusal made sacred. She says no, and the cosmos adjusts around that. No. That is extraordinary. Yet Artemis is not only refusal. This is important. If you reduce her to defense alone, you miss her tenderness. Think of childbirth. Think of young girls at shrines. Think of frightened mothers whispering her name. Think of wounded companions she tried to protect. Artemis also embodies care. Fierce care. Protective care. The kind of care willing to confront danger rather than merely comfort after damage. This too explains her necessity. Humans need compassion, but vulnerable humans often need fierce compassion. The kind that guards, the kind that watches, the kind that says you will not cross here. Artemis offered that. Then comes perhaps the most profound reason mortals needed her. Mystery. Modern life often pressures us toward explanation. Define everything, label everything, resolve ambiguity. Ancient myth worked differently. It preserved mystery as sacred territory. Artemis remains mysterious even after everything you have lived beside her. Was she lonely, free, happy, wounded, fulfilled? The answer remains partly hidden, and perhaps that hiddenness matters. Not all truth becomes clearer through total explanation. Some truths require symbolic space. Moonlight again becomes perfect metaphor. You never see everything under moonlight, yet you still navigate. Perhaps life itself is like that. Partial clarity, enough to continue, not enough to eliminate mystery. Artemis teaches comfort with that condition, not certainty, presence, awareness, integrity amid incomplete knowledge. That may be wisdom. You now understand why poets, artists, philosophers, and storytellers kept returning to her. She represented something civilization repeatedly risks forgetting. Not everything valuable should be owned. Not everything sacred should be touched. Not everything meaningful should be fully explained. Some things remain powerful precisely because they remain partly wild. Like forests, like moonlight, like inner truth, like Artemis. And now, only one final step remains. Not spectacle, not battle, silence. The story of Artemis must end where she always belonged, between memory and mystery, beneath a rising moon, where sacred fire fades and only reflection remains. Night returns the way it began, quietly. You find yourself once more walking through a forest path, beneath tall cypress and pine. The air is cool against your skin. Resin and damp earth scent the darkness. Somewhere far away, waves strike stone in slow, patient rhythms. Crickets sing from hidden grass. An owl calls once, then disappears into silence. Above you, the moon hangs full, and silver pouring pale light across roots moss, and broken marble half buried beneath vines. The world feels ancient again, as if centuries have folded inward. As if nothing truly ended, and perhaps in some way nothing did. The great temples are mostly gone now. Sacred fires that once burned before her altars have long faded into ash. The marble columns of mighty sanctuaries cracked under time-war weather and forgetting. Priests vanished. Ritual chants fell silent. Offerings of honey, silver, and oil no longer gather at old shrines. Yet Artemis remains. That is the strange power of myth. Stone dies more easily than symbols. You walk deeper into moonlight and begin to understand that Artemis was never meant to survive only through religion. She survives because she became part of the human interior landscape. Even when names change, even when civilizations transform, the pattern she embodied remains alive. A child protecting private wonder, a young woman refusing unwanted possession, a mother crossing pain toward birth, a traveler standing before dangerous change, a grieving soul learning life cannot return to what it was. Every threshold still exists, and wherever thresholds exist, something of Artemis survives. This is her true immortality, not worship, recognition. You think back across the life you have walked beside, a child on Olympus asking not for luxury but freedom, a newborn on Delos helping her mother through pain, a young huntress running beneath moonlight with deer and hounds, the silver bow forged in volcanic fire, Actaeon learning too late that sacred boundaries are real, Niobe discovering pride can harden into grief, Orion teaching Artemis that companionship can enter even the most guarded life, Callisto revealing that not every wound is chosen, Iphigenia showing that sacrifice and transformation often share the same threshold, mothers whispering prayers through childbirth, girls crossing into adulthood, temples rising, empires fading, memory remaining. None of it was random. Every myth shaped the same soul. Every loss widened understanding. Every boundary deepened meaning. Artemis did not become wise because she avoided suffering. She became wise because suffering complicated certainty. That may be her most profound transformation. At the beginning of her life, Artemis understood freedom as separation. To remain untouched, unclaimed, untethered, and perhaps that was necessary. But by the end, freedom had become something richer. Not isolation, integrity. There is a difference. Isolation closes. Integrity remains open without surrendering self. Young Artemis built walls. Mature Artemis became a threshold. That is character evolution at its deepest. She learned that boundaries need not become prisons. They can become sacred doors. Doors you choose when to open. Doors you choose when to close. That distinction feels almost modern, and yet the ancients already sensed it. Perhaps that is why Artemis continues feeling alive. She speaks across time. You stop near a clearing. Moonlight floods the open ground in silver-white silence. Mist drifts low over the earth. No wind moves. Then you see it, a deer, standing at the far edge of the clearing, still watching. Its antlers catch moonlight like branches of silver fire. The stag, the same symbol that followed her through dreams, warnings, and transformation. You do not move. Neither does it. For a long moment, nothing happens. And somehow that feels right, because Artemis was never a goddess who demanded constant explanation. She lived in pause, in observation, in stillness between actions, in the silent awareness before movement. Perhaps that is what she leaves you with. Not doctrine. Awareness. To notice when something sacred is being crossed. To recognize what inside you must remain protected. To honor transitions rather than rushing through them. To understand that growing does not always mean becoming softer. Sometimes growth means becoming clearer, gentler, and stronger at once. The deer finally turns. One step, then another. It walks into the mist. Moonlight thins around its form. Silver becomes shadow. Shadow becomes nothing. Gone. Only forest remains. Only moonlight. Only breath. And somewhere in the quiet, you understand the final mystery of Artemis. She was never simply the goddess of the moon. She was the goddess of the part of you that belongs only to you. The untamed self, the sacred interior wilderness, the place no empire, lover, family, expectation, fear, or grief may fully possess. That place must remain alive, protected, honored, free. The forest grows quieter. Even the crickets soften. Night deepens around you like warm velvet. The moon climbs higher. Its silver light gentles every edge. And if you listen very carefully, perhaps you can still hear distant footsteps moving through pine needles. Light, precise, almost soundless. A bow resting at one shoulder. Hounds somewhere beyond the trees. A goddess walking where civilization ends and wild truth begins. Still watching, still guarding, still present. Tonight, as sleep slowly draws nearer, you leave her where she has always belonged. Not trapped inside marble, not frozen inside myth, but alive in moonlight silence and sacred boundaries. Artemis walks on, and the night at last becomes peaceful.